Hello and welcome to a primer on People of the Lantern. My name's Fen, and in this video we're going to be having a look at the campaign that comes in the core box. This is something I wanted to do for a while, and I plan to do one for each of the campaigns. It's a bit of a lighter lift, so it'd be happening between recordings of the Dark Bestiary, because that's a lot of work. That's a heavy one. So a little bit lighter here. Don't know how long it's going to take though. We'll have to see, because there is actually a lot to say. So within this video, I'm going to first of all take a look at the generic elements that are present in all of the campaigns, so I can just get that out of the way with, and you don't have to really talk about it in other videos, hopefully shortening the runtime on those. Then we're going to have a look at the People of the Lantern specific stuff. Take a brief look at the setup, note any kind of oddities. There's less in People of the Lantern than others, but there's a few points sometimes you want to pay attention to. Then we'll run through the whole campaign from first story all the way through to the end, dividing it into roughly four sections, 4 eras, which I call the early game, mid game, late game, and end game. After all of that, just take a little bit of a discussion of the lore. I'm going to put that at the end here, because it's spoilerish, and then we'll have a little bit of a review, and I'll see how I feel after all of this and give some final thoughts, because I haven't yet completely formulated my opinion on People of the Lantern. I've played it a lot. I have mixed feelings on it at times, and that doesn't necessarily mean bad. That's just kind of like a lot of thoughts, a lot of things, and I'll come to a conclusion hopefully by the end of this, and see how I feel. So, before we go into People of the Lantern in specific, let's look at the common elements, because the core box is not just People of the Lantern. It isn't just that campaign. It's a whole bunch of tools and units and bits and pieces and so on that get slotted together to build a framework that other campaigns are hung over. You can pull the People of the Lantern out and you just end up with this generic section. Something that's been refined through the updates from 1.31 to 1.5 to our current edition of 1.6. Really honed into as effective a unit to provide a framework that other campaigns can slide around. It wasn't always that case. Originally, all of the 3 core monsters, the White Lion, the Screaming Antelope, and the Phoenix, were baked into the generic core locations, and when you took them out of the campaign, you were left with quite large gaps, especially the Screaming Antelope. So that was all changed, and we now have monster agnostic locations. That's what I call the generic locations, and then all of the monster stuff tends to be pushed off to their specific crafting location and bits and pieces. It makes the game way more modular. It's a really good change. I'm glad it happened, and well, it lets me now talk about just the specifics. We'll start with weapons. Every single weapon type changes depending on your mix of which quarry monsters you put in, but we always have a few standbys we can rely on. There's some lines that run through the generic locations that are just staples for us, and we can always fall back on those if we're not sure what else we want to follow. And that's what we have over here. So let's just zoom in, and there we go. Right, so at the bottom here, this is our jobs. These 2, pretty much you want to do them with every single settlement. There's a number of tools we can get to help ourselves get through them. The main thing is with Fist and Tooth, we want to get this done because it gives you this ability to every single survivor in the settlement, and that's the ability to kip up, so they can just jump up if they're knocked down at the start of the monster's turn or the survivor's turn. It saves a lot of survival. It also covers situations where a survivor cannot encourage or spend survival actions for some reason. It's kind of essential. The mastery is nice. We don't care too much about that though, because it's just a personal improvement for that given survivor. Instead, we want a Fist and Tooth Master for this specialization. Same with shields. except you have to have a shield in the gear grid, and that gives you extra armor points, and you don't get knocked down from collisions with the monster when you got a shield, both of which are very nice to have. We have a small line of shields in the core game. There's 3 in total. None of them are super great for leveling it up. And for Fist and Tooth, we've got nothing but our Fist and Tooth. Fortunately, we can supplement this with extra luck and even extra strength, but luck is probably the best way to do it, because Fist and Tooth has deadly and only 0 strength to start. And with shields, we can generally supplement that by having a lot of extra strength. So these two, they're always present, and they're kind of, you have to do them. So I wouldn't consider them staples. They're almost compulsory unless you really want to opt out of it. This next line though, these are our staples here. So these 4 weapon types appear from the very start of the campaign. They're available in the tier 1 generic locations, that's the bonesmith, and then up into the weapon crafter and into the blacksmith. This is a consistent line that we can rely on to give us various benefits. I've put them from left to right in what I think is strongest to weakest within the generic stuff. I think axe is probably the strongest. It's got the second best bonesmith weapon, probably the best weaponsmith weapon, and like a really, really good axe in the blacksmith. Club, on the other hand, its best weapon's actually in the bonesmith, and the reason it's so good is that that weapon is good in the early game, it's good in the mid game, and then when you get to the late game, heck, lantern armor is a club armor set, and clubs just work really well with lantern armor, so it just gets carried by the armor. Swords I tend to classify as sort of your bog standard generic run-of-the-mill middle weapon. We've obviously got bone sword up through scrap sword and into lantern sword. That's a nice clear progression. None of them are lights out amazing, but they're all very dependable. The scrap sword I quite like, as it has deadly, which is an interesting little diversion for it. That's not super common for swords, but none of these are like overwhelmingly powerful. The big thing about swords is not the mastery, it's this specialization, which is really cool. You make your wounding roll after you've drawn hit locations, but before you select a location. So that very first location, you get to line up where you're hitting with it, which is really neat. If you happen to roll a critical wound, you can pick the location that gives you the biggest benefit for that critical wound. If you fail, you can choose a location that doesn't punish you for failing. Likewise, if you wound, you can pick a location that maybe would have like normally a failure on it, and you can bypass that and guarantee it. This is a stronger ability than the mastery. The mastery is just stats. Stats are nice, accuracy is nice, plus on strength is, it's nice to have, it's not amazing. Plus on speed, not bad for swords, but mostly what I like is this part of it. And then we have daggers. Daggers are definitely the weakest of these staples. The big problem is that within the core game, the dagger design is high speed, low strength. Unfortunately, that runs counter to Kingdom Death's combat mechanics, where, well, let's be honest, it is better to attack and miss than it is to hit and fail to wound. Hitting and failing to wound is the worst thing you can do with an attack. Missing is only the second worst, so dagger design's not great. However, if you get a very strong survivor with high strength, and you've already handled shields, or you're not interested in doing that right now, daggers is a fun place to use, and there's some very good and interesting stuff going on. The specialization is fun. I really like this. You can get rid of an unwanted hit location for another attempt. That's neat. The mastery is super cool. I've talked about this elsewhere in other videos, so I'm not going to dive into it too much here, but I did want to mention daggers are viable, but I think they're the weakest of the choices. Above here, we've got 3 that kind of come in a bit later. So grand weapons, your journey starts if you happen to get a Zanbato, which requires a perfect bone. This used to be a line-based weapon. It's not anymore. It's very well balanced now. It used to be busted because it was so easy to make. It's about right now. Really good. And then you have the Dragon Slayer from the blacksmith. So you'll start using grand weapons once you have the ability to make that Zanbato. And then you could pretty much use them for the rest of the campaign on one survivor. It's a very good tank weapon. It's a very good damage dealing weapon. It's just a solid thing. Spears. So the weapon crafter spear is honestly not great. The white lion spear and the spedicular spear are both better, and you can get them long before you have the weapon crafter open. However, it does mean there is an option there. If you're struggling to get a spear and you need a bridge point, you can start with the scrap bone spear. I wouldn't recommend it. It's not so much that it's frail, which is a negative. It's 3 strength. 3 strength on a weapon crafter weapon is terrible, and there's a number of them that are like that, where just having 3 strength is mind-boggling. 3 strength is a node 1 or node 2 monster weapon. Weapon crafter weapons should be node 3 level 1 kind of power level, and not all of them are. Anyway, the big thing is when you get to the blacksmith, you have an incredible spear. It's the same as the axe. It's the lantern glaive. The lantern glaive is an axe spear, and it's phenomenal. We might want to make a scrap bone spear to get our spear mastery leveled up and just start work on it to prep us before we get a lantern glaive. Of course, within the core campaign as it stands, if you just play out of the box, we've actually got a number of spears we can rely on, which is really nice. Just over here, 2 other weapons to note. First of all, whips. Whips technically turn up in the middle portion of the generics, but I really don't recommend the Hunter's Whip. It's got the same problem that the Scrap Bone Spear has. 3 strength is not really acceptable for a tier 2 crafting location, but if you are very strong, it does have a good ability. More significantly, the Ring Whip is great. It is really, really good. And it is a fun weapon to use, and it also within People of the Lantern gets upgraded further. Our last one here, this is one of the kind of big expansion recommendations I have for People of the Lantern. Qatar is kind of a trap within the core game. The issue is that we have 2 Qatars, which is the Lion Beast Qatar and the Beast Knuckle. Now, these 2 weapons, neither of them are bad. Having them exist in the same campaign is a little awkward because they're kind of the same power level. The Lion Beast Qatar leverages Deadly, which is one of the reasons we really like it, because Deadly generates resources through critical wounds. But the Beast Knuckle is quite functional because it has very good strength, and it's a nice alternative playstyle. The trouble is, you're not going to use both of these in the same campaign. You're going to have one Qatar user, and what's even worse is that's it. You get your Lion Beast Qatar and you go, oh, this is nice. Then you look at the Beast Knuckle and you go, well, I'm already using the Lion Beast Qatar and the Beast Knuckle isn't much better. What's next? And the answer is, well, you can dress up as a white lion and cosplay that a bit to get a bit more strength. You can get a monster tooth necklace to help out with your strength a bit more, or you can maybe, if you're lucky, leverage Deadly really hard. But ultimately, that's it. That's the end of your journey, which is frustrating. However, our dear friend, the White Giga Lion, comes with a Qatar that is specifically for People of the Lantern, and that here is the Oxidized Beast Qatar. This takes the Lion Beast Qatar, which you'd have crafted all the way near the beginning of your campaign, and lets you oxidize it into an endgame weapon, which really helps. Sure, the progression in the middle part of the campaign is a little broken because you don't have that bridge in Qatar, and you may need to look at expansions to try and manage that. This is huge. This is really, really helpful. You don't have to get the Lion Beast Qatar, the White Giga Lion to oxidize the Beast Qatar. But if you are not doing that, if you don't have it, if you can't afford it, don't train up Qatar. Just don't do it because your progression goes nowhere. I would instead use the Lion Beast Qatar on the survivor who is training up Fist and Tooth as like their alternate. If you're playing with other people and they're exploring the game, you might want to just let them find this out themselves. Maybe that's happening, around the time that I'm recording this or not. Who knows. But ultimately, I think it's a little unfortunate that we have such a good starting Qatar that goes nowhere. Okay, so that's weapons, and as I say, we can rely on these. We're going to now have a look at the generic locations. We're going to follow those through, and we'll see how a campaign's put together and what our core options are Then we'll get into the specifics of People of the Lantern and also a little bit about the core monsters that come with the game and how they can impact and change things a little bit. We'll always have in a campaign our starting location, our core location. This is the place where the monster is located. That's consistent across all of them. The monster at the heart of the campaign. In the case of the Lantern Horde, this is like a Trojan horse. There is a watcher lurking inside this. You can see that these are like the font of knowledge, because survivors are born or emerge out of the ground without any pre-knowledge, and because watchers erase the history of everything, there's not very much written down. A lot of it has been destroyed, and language is how we pass knowledge from each other. This is the reason we manage to do better and better. We can build on stuff that's come before us because we can look at that framework and learn from it and read and understand, or we can talk and communicate our ideas with each other. So survivors don't have that, but instead the monsters supply it. The monsters supply a language, they supply the source of innovation, they supply the start of the locations. We'll talk briefly about shared experience and the rest of this when we get into People of the Lantern specific. So we'll come back down here for this, but I want to say this is our starting point, and then we're going to use that to open up these three locations. So these kind of define the three different paths: weapons, armor, items. The texture of these three things is quite different. Weapons are the most disposable thing. You generally only need 1 or 2 weapons on a survivor's gear grid, and you will be replacing these whenever you find better options. Weapon power tends to be determined by either its strength or its level of deadly and how well you can support that. Armor, on the other hand, is our most intensive thing that we deal with. This is because armor tends to be 5 items, and you want them because you get this extra bonus through this additional card. So effectively you get 6 cards out of 5 bits and pieces, and armor is a huge part of protection for most survivors. There's a reason why whenever we can have survivors who don't need to wear armor, we get excited, because suddenly we've freed up a bunch of slots and we don't need to put as much hide into protecting our survivors. And finally we have items. Items are stupidly good in this game. Items ignore the problems of becoming obsolete. They do not become obsolete in the way that weapons and armor does. As monster toughness climbs, you need better weapons. As monster damage climbs, you need better armor. But monster grease, dried acanthus, lucky charm, bandages, they're as good against a level 1 as they are against the end game boss of any given campaign. In fact, in some cases they just keep scaling and getting stronger and stronger. It's rare that you find things like that, and when you do, they represent such value that they can help you an immense amount in getting anywhere with a campaign, because if you invest a little bit at the start and it keeps paying off every lantern year, it's incredibly beneficial. So that's our 3 types that's tied across the entire game, and let's just have a look at what these 3 locations offer us. I've put the best stuff in. Sometimes I've just left things out. I'm not going to go into a deep dive with these, but I just wanted to show how the lineages are, because these are the things we're comparing all of our quarry gear to. Basically, if you can make something with this generic stuff that is made from base resources that come from the basic resource deck, and it's better than what you're getting by spending more with monster resources, why are you spending the monster resources on that? You should be spending them on other things. This is the most significant and important thing, and it's a reason why you'll see and read people say X is just not worth using, and that's because you have better or equal for less in the core selections. On the weapon front, I've highlighted 6 here. That's basically everything. Actually going to be talking about these 2, but I've put them in with the leather stuff because they're basically leather, but down here. They require ammonia, they require leather. You're not making those 2 until you've got the leather worker open. So we have our 4 weapon types, as mentioned. Very briefly, bone axe. I used to not recommend this. The reason was that a bone axe cost a bone and an organ, and previously a bone and an organ could make you a bone blade and a monster grease. That was better than a bone axe. It's changed now because monster grease costs 2 organs, so I think that the price paid for a bone axe is more reasonable now. 3 strength is a very good amount to get right from the start, especially in this core campaign, because you don't have to worry about a super dense location when fighting a white lion. So the bone axe has gone up in stonks. It's pretty good. Bone blade still remains incredibly good, because for 1 bone it is a really nice weapon. It's more accurate and stronger than the founding stones, so that's fantastic and a great starter. As mentioned, the bone club is like kind of nuts how good it is. It has this cumbersome. That kind of doesn't matter if you're playing the tank role, because the monster's coming to you. It's going to start its turns next to you and you're going to smack it with this thing. And this thing is good enough for hitting node 3 monsters with. So, wow. Bone darts. I would always make a set of bone darts. 3 strength, really nice. And again, as mentioned, I rate strength over accuracy. Range is also super powerful. The negative is there's no throne mastery. I wish there was. I really wish there was. Please, Adam, give me a throne mastery, please. But you'll definitely want one of these. And in People of the Lantern, with the White Lion, it is your first purchase. Your first bone should always go to a bone darts because of the old classic ground fighting. I talk about that in the Dark Bestiary. Last thing to briefly note, Skull Helm. If you get a skull, this is really, really good. Just don't take it against the Butcher, because the Butcher can do direct severe head injuries, ignoring armor, and he'll trash this. And watch out, it's fragile, so vibration damage, if that's the thing in your campaign, don't put it anywhere near that. But otherwise, this is really good. And of course, in People of the Skull, it's your primary form of head protection. So, you know, solid enough. I'm not super excited to spend 2 bone on this, but a skull I will do, because that's a really nice return on investment, and it can save lives early on when you're trying to keep your population stable and get it up. So yeah, boom, boom, boom. Also, this does become part of an armor set if you have the Lion Knight, which is really nice. In the Skinnery, everything here is good. Rawhide armor is so very good, because for 5 resources you get 10 armor points, you get +1 evasion, you get survival when departing, you get a ridiculously good set bonus that gives you a 50% refund on every survival you spend. That more or less increases your survival by about 1.8-ish, you know, like 80% extra survival, because anytime you get your survival back, that survival has a 50% chance of coming back as well. Potentially unlimited survival. The first armor set of Rawhide you make is going to possibly last you all campaign, especially when you don't have a lot of expansions to choose from, because it turns out archers and support survivors care more about survival than they do about having really hard armor. So your first set of Rawhide will generally last you for a long time and be really good investment. Rawhide is one of the reasons why so many Node 1 monster armor sets are kind of dismissed as not really being good enough, because this is 10 armor points for 5 resources, and many of the others are about 15 armor points for 10 resources. It's just not good enough unless they're doing other things, which often they're not doing enough. This is our first tanking set. As I say, it's going to get passed down to the damage dealers and then passed on to the support or the archer. It's just going to keep going and going. I think the second Rawhide set is also quite good. Third, you really have to be struggling to be doing that or have very bad options. So there's just like diminishing returns. I think 1 or 2 armor sets is pretty much always a craft. A third one isn't necessarily a bad choice if you're struggling to get enough hide together to build anything else. On our other 3 options, we've got the Rawhide Drum. Mostly I'd only take this against Nemesis monsters, and I'd only be doing that if I'm using Drums, which has Rhythm Chaser and benefits from Drum, which is very nice sort of synergy, but I don't want to take these on hunts. Bandages, you're going to make one of these for sure. You might even make 2 of these. It's great affinities. It's an incredibly good ability. We generally don't see anything later on that is as good at removing bleeding as this. And when I talk about People of the Lantern, this is one of our priority crafts. Finally, Rawhide Whip. You need ammonia for this, but it's pretty cheap to craft. It's not really going to be a weapon, although it has an incredibly strong ability. It's just held back by terrible, terrible strength. I don't understand why whips are this bad. 2 strength I think could have been reasonable here. 1 is absolutely awful. However, whips are amazing on hunts because there's a whole bunch of places where they can just save lives. So this is a really cheap craft to stick in someone's gear grid, and if by some chance your tank turns out to be really strong, if he's just like, you know, carved out a gigantic slab of meat, heck, he could maybe just whip and keep that monster locked on him with the priority target token, which is incredibly strong. So everything in the skinnery is good, but rawhide armor is like the real big thing, and generally your first 6 hide will be full set of rawhide armor and a set of bandages. Every campaign, more or less. It's rare that I don't do that. Last of all, we have an organ grinder. This is the most important of these 3 locations, although it might be the one you unlock last, because good weapons and good armor save lives and bring back resources. Items and gaining more population via augury, it's nice, but on the whole, they need the other bits to really click together. It's generally a juggling kind of thing, and usually because most of these are organs or fresh acanthus, you're not too worried about it. Key thing though is all 6 of these items are amazing. Dried acanthus, you can get this easily from the Screaming Antelope. It saves lives, it generates survival. It's really good if you're going into a nemesis fight, especially the Butcher. As mentioned, the Butcher sometimes likes to bite your face. Dried acanthus is one of the main protections against that. Fecal salve, really solid, nice affinity, survival gains, fantastic. If you're not a threat until you attack, certain monsters just ignore you. The Butcher, for example, doesn't attack anyone who isn't a threat. He'll menace, but he doesn't attack anyone who isn't a threat. So this is just really way better than you'd ever think it is when you just look at it on paper, because in practice, it's amazing for the right kind of survivor. Lucky Charm, I mentioned that early, incredibly strong, key part of many early game strategies, but keeps going all campaign. You know, +1 luck is really good. Monster Grease, same thing. It's phenomenal, even like levels up, and this synergizes with leather armor incredibly well and rawhide armor, so it's just a solidly great item. So good that it got doubled in price for 1.6. Monster Tooth Necklace is amazing. Strength is such a important thing for taking out monsters. +2 strength. Yeah, +2 strength is way bigger than you'd think in a game like this when you're only rolling a d10 for your wounding modifier. And stone noses are cheap and quite nice and helpful, and they're easy to dispose of if you get something better during the hunt. When we get onto the middle tier, Weapon Crafter offers us our axe. Counterweighted axe is amazing. Scrap Bone Spear, already talked about that. We got Scrap Dagger, struggles a little bit, but barbed does help. Scrap Sword, mentioned this. Barbed, deadly. That makes up for the fact that its strength is really garbo. It definitely could do with +1 strength to make it, to justify its existence in the Weapon Crafter. Then we have these two. These clubs are both pretty impressive. The abilities on them are amazing, but they're held back by the stat line. In both cases, these should have +1 strength. Again, if you have a strong survivor, they can work quite well, and they do benefit from lantern armor, so there's neat things you can do there. I also genuinely do like these abilities. They're both great. It's just strength that holds them back. And the Zambato, as I mentioned, it's just ridiculously strong. Really, really good. Leatherworker? Yep, we always have access to leather. 9 resources and an endeavor, because you need to, make the leather. It gives you just a great pile of defense stats. The big things this does is a lot of green affinities, combos with round leather shield and monster grease to build a very nice evasive build. Gives you a little bit of survival, gives you a little bit of like post-act flexibility. That's all fine. This will be like your second tank gear, and this is another part of the reason why many Node 1 and Node 2 armor sets are just not good enough, because for 9 resources you're getting 4 armor points in each and every single location, you're getting a ton of affinities, good survival, insanity gains, extra protection there, you get bash immunity. It's really hard for many of the Node 1 and Node 2 armor sets to compete against this, and leather armor represents your stepping into the mid game of the campaign. Right? Absolutely every time, once I've finished with my rawhide armor and I've grabbed the Node 1 or Node 2 armor sets I'm actually interested in, leather is my next benchmark for where I'm going. And then these two I briefly mentioned, you're going to want them. You want one bone sickle, you want a bunch of bone pickaxes. They do a lot of really great things. I'm not going to go into that here, but these generate resources. These are a big reason why I advocate 8 slot builds wherever possible, so you have room to fit something like this. As mentioned, just a great set bonus, nothing fancy. You know, leather isn't anything incredible and unique, which is unusual when you compare it to rawhide. Rawhide does something that no other armor set currently does, which is that mental AI control via the headband. Leather doesn't do that. Leather's more generic, which I actually think makes leather a bit better balanced. And if only the Node 1 and Node 2 armor sets had their armor points bumped to an appropriate level, we'd be in a different position entirely, because I think leather is spot on where it needs to be. Rawhide, it would be fine, but we really need more AI control options to help us move on from rawhide and not clutch it as closely as many of us do at times. Last one, items, Barber Surgeon. This location is not just good because of the items, it's good because of trepanning. Trepanning is a reliable way to get rid of disorders. Now sure, a lot of the time you don't manage it, because it's only a 3 to 6, and on a 1 or 2 you can suffer intracranial hemorrhage, but it's okay, you can cure that intracranial hemorrhage here as well, so it just sometimes burns endeavours, and this result is like fine. In particular, this is worth remembering if you choose to go for an Accept Darkness settlement. This can help you keep your disorders down as low as possible so you don't have to worry about brain trauma at all. Really useful tool. And then on the gear front, we got First Aid Kit, which is one of the other ways we remove bleed, but also it removes tokens. So you can attribute tokens, I should say, negative attribute tokens. Nothing else does that really very often. It's quite rare, so that's very good. It also has this amazing set of affinities. The Almanac is here because, again, if you're playing Accept Darkness, this is a way of locking you out from never dying to brain trauma. Blue Charm, best in class on the charms, really good. I've talked about that in the past. The other 2 charms I'm less impressed with. Bug Trap, don't like that this fails 20% of the time, but if you're leaning into cooking, it can be very strong. And Scavenger Kit is amazing, absolutely amazing. The earlier you get this, the better. It's usually where I'll chuck my first perfect hide, because it pays off. Every single showdown fight you win with a Scavenger Kit, things get better. Okay, so our final little bit to look at here before we get into campaign specific stuff is the blacksmith. This is the end of our journey for weapons and armor. Within the generic stuff, items pretty much end here. Almost everything in this settlement location is amazing. Perfect Slayer obviously is ridiculously good and very hard to get. You always craft it if you can. But we also have, as I said, a very good club tanking set, a phenomenally good shield that provides 3 protection to all hit locations if you have shield mastery sorted out, and has block too. A great grand weapon, a solid dagger, an amazing spear/axe, a solid sword, a polishing lantern which makes all of these early iron weapons palatable. This didn't used to exist. I'm really happy it does. And as mentioned, the ring whip, which I think is actually a really solid weapon. You have to have a polishing lantern, but it's in a good spot, and for the purposes of talking about People Lantern, it's actually even better. The big negative of Lantern Armour is it has an awkward layout. You'd have to put this into the middle of the gear grid in slot 5, and then you put all of the other pieces around it to form a cross. That's awkward. The set doesn't work incredibly well with Monster Grease unless you're willing to make some compromises. It provides 2 affinities, so it's not too hard to get there, but you need to break the set apart slightly. And the negative movement is quite an issue, especially given that Lantern Greaves are a little awkward to get fully active to bring it back. But I still really rate this armor set. I think it's very, very good, and it's a reason why I like clubs for the late game. Yeah, so solid location with a lot of great options. I really appreciate the addition of the polishing lantern. That's our generics. I'm not going back to those for any future videos on Sun or Stars or Dreamkeeper or whatever else. This is where they're done. I'm going to pause the video and take a drink, and then we're going to talk about People of the Lantern for the next, hopefully, 30 minutes. Okay, let's get in. Whenever you look at a settlement sheet, one of the first things you want to pay attention to are your milestones. Many of these milestones are generic for all campaigns. That's first child, first time death count, population reaches 15, population reaches 0. These are principal triggers. This one is obviously game over. I'll talk about each of these principles in a moment. We also have the Hooded Knight, which is campaign specific, so watch out for that one. We'll come back to the timeline and walk through that, and we'll also talk about, on the back side here, this little area here briefly. It's gonna be a bit of a talk near the end. Let's flip this back. The main thing is, before we get any further, is talking about just the setup. So this is the default setup for People of the Lantern, and I'm briefly going to talk about the node system. This came in the Gambler's Chest, but it's merely a formalization of what we've been using for a long time. And the concept is each monster has a node, and you're picking a number of nodes and you set up your campaign. Now the default here we have is node 1, Quarry. Node 1 is our White Lion, our Quarry node 2 is our Screaming Antelope, and our Quarry node 3 is our Phoenix. We don't have a Quarry node 4 for this. And then on the Nemesis front, we have Butcher at node 1, Kingsman at node 2, and the Hand at node 3. It's worth saying that, in theory, the Nemesis monsters are more dangerous than the Quarry ones, and for the most part that holds kind of true, although this Joker does buck that trend a little bit. And this is where we get our pacing for the campaign. As for what else you could put in this, currently every single other monster works absolutely fine in this. A few very interesting recommendations: you can replace the Kingsman with either the Slenderman or the Lion Knight. Both of them have synergy with the core 3 Quarry monsters, because they need them for crafting either armor sets in the case of the Lion Knight or a bunch of gear in the case of Slenderman. That's really nice, and it's also nice to replace the Kingsman. We could replace the Butcher with the Manhunter. They're very similar while feeling different. When it comes to the Hand, my opinion is just get the Black Knight and replace it. Okay, Black Knight is so good, really good, and leave the Hand for People of the Dreamkeeper, where he gets to turn up and do his thing properly. I don't think this is a very interesting showdown fight. The other thing to note is Node 4. Now, Node 4 currently has 3 monsters. It has the Dung Beetle Knight, the Lion God, and the King. Now, this is one of those things where one of these is not like the others. You see, the Dung Beetle Knight and the Lion God are definitely more dangerous than the Node 3 monsters, such as the Phoenix, or the Dragon King, or Sunstalker. But they're nowhere near the King. The King turns up very late in the campaign, and we're going to briefly dwell on that. But beforehand, I actually just think that really we should be separating node 4 apart and saying node 4 is for the Dung Beetle Knight and the Lion God, and node 5 quarry is for the king, because it really doesn't feel anything like the other two. Maybe you say node like 3.5 for the Dung Beetle Knight and Lion God, and then node 4 for the king, but either way they don't sit together properly. They don't feel on the same level at all. Before I get into another thing with the king, node 3, which I skipped past, they're all great. Okay, I'm not such a fan of the Phoenix as I am the other two, but there are still a lot of positives to the Phoenix, and the gear is a lot of fun. I will note that it's really enjoyable to play this campaign with the Sunstalker and the Dragon King as quarries in the same thing, and this is one of the few places where you can do that, because like thematically and mechanically, hunting Sunstalkers in People of the Sun doesn't make any sense. Hunting the Dragon King in People of the Stars also doesn't make any sense, and it kind of undermines the campaign experience for both of those. However, they work really well together, so that's a lot of fun. And in fact, I go as far as saying my personal preferred structure for quarries is I like a 3-2-1, which is 3 node 1 and node 2 monsters, some mix of those, 2 node 3 monsters, and then 1 node 4 monster. That keeps things interesting enough for me, and because I generally exhaust a monster and I don't really want to grind the same monster with no more stuff, so I like having that little bit of variety. And also with quarry monsters, you can't ever overload on them. If you don't want to hunt a quarry monster, it doesn't matter that it's in the campaign. Sure, it has its story impact initially, but otherwise, if you don't go near it, it's just doing its thing. It's just hanging out. It's not causing any issues. So as you get more experienced, you can add more quarries in. It does increase the power of your settlement, though. No debate about that. The more monsters you have to hunt, the more gear options you have, the more combos you can put together, and the more powerful things you can manage. So be aware of that. You may find your own sort of taste for it and how it adjusts up and down and what suits you best, but in my opinion, 3-2-1 or maybe 2-2-1, or that's more enjoyable than just the 2-1-1 that is considered the standard. Okay, outside of that, the last thing to note is the king has some difficult applications in respect to how the Watcher works. I'll discuss that more when we get to Watched, but just be aware you can run the king from the Gambler's Chest in People of the Lantern, and thematically it feels quite cool because of course we have the Kingsman, we have the Hand. It's nice to have most of the faction together in the same campaign, but you don't want to be just doing it without understanding that there are a couple of wrinkles you're going to have to navigate. So anyway, let us now get on to, we've gotten past all that, the first story. So very brief look at this. Post our prologue fight, we'll be rolling on this card. I'm not going to read all the details of this. The key thing is that the survivors see this lantern horde and they feel like it's a safe place. It's not. No, there's a reason the other monsters don't go anywhere near it. But we'll get there on that. And then you get to roll for survivors. A big thing to note here is if all 4 of your survivors manage to get through the prologue intact, and you roll a 7+, you have 14 survivors. And 15 survivors is your society principle. So unlocking that in Lantern Year 1 can be really helpful and something worth doing. That's the main thing there, and otherwise on the first story we'll get our language, we'll set up our Lantern Horde, we'll set up our innovation deck, and my opinion at this point of the game, which is what I call the early game or the pre-butcher phase, is be cognizant of pressing this button. I've discussed this a bunch. I will say there is a strategy where you can innovate to try and get Surge, and then you go fight a level 2 node 1 monster like a White Lion and try and just burst it down very quickly with a bunch of attacks and some thrown founding stones. It's a risky strategy. It's not one that I personally enjoy. I like that early stage of fighting the level ones a bit and sort of experimenting. I don't want to jump ahead, but I wanted to mention it. So instead, my personal recommendation is maybe hold off on innovating until you've got a weapon for everyone and you've completed your first set of rawhide and bandages. That's essentially 4 bones and 6 hide. And then you can think about start innovating. You can probably even sometimes get that through the prologue fight. You might be there already. It's possible. If that's the case, great. When you do start innovating, these are the top 2 initial hits, in my opinion. We'll talk about some campaign-specific little wrinkles and bits, but this is more increased survival limit and improves the quality of all your remaining innovations. I've talked about that in the innovation video. Drums gives you extra evasion via Rhythm Chaser. It gives you extra strength via Synchronized Strike. It's really good. So these are my favorite 2 starters. But the main thing here is concentrate on your gear, get your foundation set up, and then start working on your innovations. You know, as you get more experience, you can play differently, absolutely. But hold on the button maybe for a lantern year or 2. Get your first set of rawhide, get your bandages, and make sure everyone's got something to hit the monster with that's not just harsh language and a sharpened stone. Right, so then we've got our principles. So within People of the Lantern and other campaigns, the principles that are worth picking kind of varies a bit. We'll look at them down here, starting with our births. So we're going to pick these principles off our first intimacy trigger. We'll look at intimacy right after we've been through these milestones. There isn't a right choice on which one to pick. Now, you'll often see recommendations for survival of the fittest, and I agree survival of the fittest is the stronger one. It's +1 survival limit. It gives you a lifetime reroll. It makes all your survivors +1 strength and +1 evasion. That makes combat a lot easier. That is strong, but it reduces the amount of saviors you can get access to, and also it is a little more tricky to handle because you are rolling 2 dice and picking the lowest result, so you often have to be good at managing your rerolls and ensuring you're using the right survivors in order to avoid rolling the worst results, because the worst results can be pretty terrible, as we'll see when we look at the intimacy table. Protect the Young on the other side is like stronger for intimacy stuff. It's more helpful when you're trying to get your footing on holding a good population. My personal recommendation is going past 20, but as long as you're past like 16 or so you can suffer a couple of years in a row and not get wiped, you know, failures and deaths, plagues or whatever, you got a bit of a buffer. But like I say, I generally aim for past 20. This really helps you do that, and it gives you access to more saviors, and saviors can do a lot if you know how to use them. They're very much disposable survivors, and protecting increases the chances of them. So I don't think there is a 100% right answer, but obviously there is more power within survival of the fittest, and you'll find experienced players gravitate towards this more unless they're experienced in saviors. On the death principle, which might be the first principle you trigger if somebody died in the prologue, there's only one choice here, and that's graves. Now, when we have the gambler's chest, that changes, but for now, cannibalize just isn't worth it at all compared to graves. You see, running out of population is the only way you can lose the campaign before you get to the Watcher. Okay, so what Graves does is gives you endeavours for people dying. It also gives all new survivors +1 understanding, which combines with Saga to give you insight immediately when a survivor is born. Really good. And these extra endeavours, there's a whole bunch of tricks you can perform with them. If you ever have a special showdown, then this is really nice. You don't need to worry about the survivors. If they die, you'll come back and have a bunch of endeavours to pay otherwise to cover things. And For the most part, Nemesis showdowns, if you just get wiped on them, they're not as punishing as quarry showdowns because you usually don't generate as many resources. Plus, it was a special showdown. So, Graves is my 100% recommendation here. Graves is also really nice in combination with Survival of the Fittest because it gives you more chances to replace lost population if it happens when you roll badly on Intimacy or you get in a bit of a bind. As I said, I think once we get to Ark Survivors, which are in the Gambler's chest, that's when Cannibalize comes on the table. I'll talk about that in a Gambler's chest video. But suffice to say for now, I think there's only one right answer, and it's Graves. On our society principle, either one's good. Accept Darkness gives you survivors who are really durable in the showdown, and as mentioned, you can clear off the disorders via trepanning. You can get an almanac to lock them in. The only way they're going to die on their brain trauma rolls, because this +2, is if they get really high results, and they have to have 3 disorders to kill them at that point, which if you're locking them away from doing it because you're scrubbing all of the disorders off whenever you go on hunts, fantastic. So this is great if you want to protect individual survivors, and it's very helpful to hold on to your population because it makes survivors less likely to die. Collective Toil, on the other hand, this thing has a way higher ceiling if you like doing funky combo-y kind of stuff in the settlement phase. It basically pays you dividends on your settlement, and I've had Collective Toil really snowball my population up quite a bit. There's some crazy combos you can do that can get to triple and even quadruple digits in population, and Collective Toil is a part of that puzzle. But even if you're not doing bonkers, crazy, distorting stuff with the game system, this is a really nice refund, and just having 22 population or so and you get +2 endeavors, that can help you get a few more people and get you to 30 and so on and so forth. So it's really your choice. They're both good, and I think this is a play style and a settlement choice. It's really up to you. Okay, so we're now on to Intimacy and Saviors, and then we get to walk through the timeline, which should be a bit faster than everything else because I've done the groundwork. So let's get over to the rulebook. So there's a few ways of triggering Intimacy. You can spend Love Juice, the basic resource, Matchmaker, which is a bold based courage trigger that happens during the settlement, really good, or by successfully rolling on augury. Generally you'll be doing augury initially. Your goal is to try and do it when you don't have any important resources in your settlement storage, because you'll have to spend them, and eventually you'll have a survivor with three or higher understanding and you use them. It can be frustrating at times to try and roll Intimacy, because if you don't get the 7+, you don't get to do the Intimacy roll. That's why I like Matchmaker. That's why I like to save my Love Juices. It's nice to have those guaranteed Intimacy rolls. The other thing to note is your first Intimacy roll is incredibly terrifying. There's a 30% chance that you don't get +1 population and you lose survivors. You lose both of them here. You lose the female one here. This also sets our population ratios. So if we look at this table, we can see that men die 10% of the time and women die 30% of the time. So we want our settlement to generally hold a 3 females to every 1 male ratio in order to cover this. Now, of course, if you take Protect the Young, that can change, and you can hold near 50% population rates if you like. But generally, I prefer to have more female survivors than male survivors. Additionally, female survivors have natural advantages when it comes to fist and tooth, and also they don't have their they don't suffer the damaged groin situation that happens when the man-stealer visits a man. And if you've ever had a survivor with weapon mastery or high number of weapon proficiency points getting run into the man-stealers, suddenly you can't pass on your weapon proficiency from that survivor to the children. So I prefer generally sending females out on hunts. I'll send males out occasionally, but usually in a support role, or if they have unconscious fighter, which makes them immune to man-stealers. So just something to think about there on the population ratios. The other thing is, if you're struggling with this first population roll, if it keeps going wrong, I cannot recommend the Ringtail Vixen White Box enough. It gives you a bookmark that improves this table a little bit on your very first failure. I really like it. I think it is such an interesting, fun and flavourful addition, and it helps smooth over one of the, I think, worst parts of randomness. After that, you've got your new principle, and things will change. Obviously, if you're rolling with Protect the Young, you get to pick the higher of the two results. If you're rolling with Survival the Fittest, you have to pick the lower of the two results, but you can always spend lifetime rerolls to improve that. The general trick with Survival the Fittest is to have the male and female both never have spent their lifetime rerolls, and then you've got 2 rerolls to use on the event, one for each of the survivors, to help smooth out if the dice are too low. Other things to note: bed, +1 permanent strength on these results, and the 9+ result is twins, specifically the 10 becomes saviors. Now, you'd only get the saviors if you have hovel innovated, and on that 10. Now this is one of those little tricks where if you want to build up your population, you might want to hold off on innovating hovel, because a savior is not just only one survivor versus 2. Saviors burn out a lot faster than normal survivors. We're going to look at them in a moment, but essentially, if you're looking to grow your population in the early stages of the game, hold off on innovating hovel, especially if you're playing with Protect the Young, and you'll get more twins. It really helps to spend 1 endeavor or 1 love juice or 1 matchmaker and get twins. It's fantastic. So that's something to consider. That said, how about we take a look at saviors? Saviors share a number of common elements between each, but they also have separate elements that split them apart based on the dream that they have and the colour that they're in. So let's get into that. We'll look at the individual pieces. I will say I don't think there is a right answer which savior you should pick, but I do think there is a wrong answer. So, birth of a savior. The newborn vanishes from the loving arms of the settlement for a fraction of a second. In that second, it spends a lifetime in the domain of the ethereal dreamer and returns with a dream. We'll touch back on that near the end of this video. Choose one. We have the Dream of the Beast, the red, Dream of the Crown, green, and Dream of the Lantern, blue. And each of these link into the general theming we see for affinities. Red links into strength and wounding and attacking, hitting. Green leans into defense and protection, evasion, and blue leans into luck and also like manipulation of decks and control, mental kind of things. So generally it's blood, body, and mind is one way to sort of think of them, or blood, body, and brain if you want to make them all Bs. The other thing that all of them get is they'll get +1 permanent affinity within their particular colour. They'll get +1 of a given stat. They'll get an ability that they can activate, will give them a bonus, and also age them up. When they get to age 2, they will gain a secret fighting art. Also, quite significantly, this life exchange ability at the bottom. So in the aftermath, they gain 1 additional hunt XP. They cannot wear gear with the other keyword, so watch out for that. It's easy to forget about that keyword if you're not used to playing with saviors a lot. If they trigger the white story event, they cease to exist. When they retire, they cease to exist. They cannot become ageless. They can't have the ageless ability. Not on this page, but that's another thing to be aware of. This is because saviors trade in their ability... Hang on, I'm going to speak to my dog. It's okay, she was licking her bed and it was very distracting. Where was I? Yeah, so this is because saviors trade in their their lifespan for power. There's a wonderful set of resin models that shows each of the stages of life of a savior I think it's 20 years, 40 years, 60 years maybe, something like that. They're beautiful little resin sculpts. I hope they get remastered at some point in the future. But yeah, they trade lifespan for power, and eventually once they hit the end of it, they slip off into the realm of the domain of the ethereal dreamer, and they are gone. Now the negative of that means they're not very good for training weapon proficiency because they're aging up faster than anyone else. The positives of that are, if you're playing with arc survivors, they'll power through an arc like a philosophy a lot faster than the others, and they get access to some rather interesting and solid abilities. The other big negative, though, is when they hit retirement, they're gone. You lose a population. They don't sit around in the settlement. They can't occasionally go out to hunt despite being retired. They are gone, gone, gone. Now, if you don't ever max their age, you can just leave them in the settlement, but you are capped to one saviour. So why would you do that? The answer is, it's a thing called murder baiting. Basically, murder is a terrible card, it's really frustrating, and it kills your survivor with the most hunt XP. That survivor normally is the survivor who has a lot of weapon proficiency, especially if it happens early on. And if you haven't completed your mastery and they get murdered, it frankly sucks, because a lot of work you put in has just been undone, and it's bad enough that you have to take the survivor out and deal with the dangers of the hunt and the showdown. To have them come back to the settlement and get murdered kind of sucks, you know. So this is what you do to murder bait is you level up a saviour so that they're 1 point short of retirement by the time you finish the aftermath, and they get back to the settlement, and then you never take them out again, and they will sit there and you just wait for the murderer to turn up and kill them. Or if you've got to the point you have other survivors you can afford to lose, then you'll take that saviour out and let them have one last hurrah before they disappear from existence. So that's one way you can use them. The other way is to actually just utilise them in their intended fashion. And in order to do that, let's have a look at these three colours and discuss how they can be used. So first of all, Dream of the Beast. They get +1 permanent red affinity and +1 strength. Strength is an important stat. +1 strength, though, compared to what the other two get, isn't super exciting. Their ability is Keratosis, which is a reference to like blood and body. Before making an attack roll, you may declare Keratosis X in a loud booming voice where X is a number. You're not an X-Man. If you do, that attack gains X automatic hits. X cannot be more than your total red affinities, and when the attack ends you gain +X hunt XP. So this gives you a way to age up quickly to get to age 2, which you want to do because then you'll gain the Beast of Keratosis secret fighting art. The thing is, and I've talked about this earlier in this very video, hits are less important than wounds. Just because you get like 3 or 4 automatic hits or whatever, that doesn't mean much unless you can convert them into wounds. Now hopefully you can with the Red Saviour, because you've got a little bit of extra strength here and you've probably got a Monster Tooth necklace to help buffer things up further, but on the whole that's not super exciting. So let's see if Beast of Keratosis' secret fighting art can remedy things a little bit further. This is our first secret fighting art, and we'll get it when we reach this point here on the track. Okay, so we have now got 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10 hunt XP left before we will evaporate. Beast of Keratosis has this cool little piece of artwork that we still don't know who this individual is. You may concentrate. So concentrate is a rather unique little part of the game. I'm going to read from the glossary so you know how it works. Okay, so this is the current living glossary as of the point of recording. Concentrate. You need to focus your mind to perform extraordinary feats. At the start of your act, declare your intent to concentrate. Immediately end your act and attempt to concentrate until the start of your next act. So you're skipping your entire act and you're not doing anything until the next act you have next round. To successfully concentrate, you cannot perform any kind of actions, you can't move, you can't get knocked down, you can't suffer any kind of damage, gain any bleeding or any negative attribute tokens. It's okay for the monster to target you, but if anything happens as the consequences of that targeting, well, tough luck, you've failed your concentration, you're going to have to start again. So generally you need to get somewhere relatively safe and get a bit of distance if you're going to do this. Assuming we've successfully skipped our whole turn and we've concentrated, what do we get? Well, the Beast of Keratosis has you reach into the dream and disappear in a shimmer of heat, which does sound really cool. Place your survivor adjacent to the monster, nice. Activate a weapon in your grid and attack the monster. For this attack, your attack speed is equal to your red affinities. You hit automatically and you gain strength equal to double your red affinities, then you gain +6 hunt XP. So this is fairly strong. This is a nice little ability, but gaining +6 hunt XP does mean you basically get to do this once, and then if you do it a second time, you're going to cease to exist right after the attack. So it's a heck of a price to pay. I would be super impressed with this. I would really rate it, but as we're going to see when we look at the other two colours, it kind of falls off a bit compared to the others. I am a little disappointed that this doesn't automatically wound, if I'm honest. It's because you're paying a lot. Otherwise, if maybe this cost less hunt XP, like maybe +3 hunt XP, I'd feel a little bit that's a little bit more balanced. But it's, again, it's not bad. It's just compared to the other two, as we'll see, it's not amazing. Speaking of which, let's go look at our next one, which is the Dream of the Crown. I'll zoom in a bit more here for this. A newborn saviour gains +1 permanent green affinity, +1 permanent evasion, and the following abilities. Dominatus. When you suffer damage, you may declare Dominatus, I've come to bargain. No, Dominatus X in a loud booming voice, and if you do, you gain X to each hit location. X cannot be more than your total green affinities. After the damage resolve, gain +X hunt XP. So a mirror of Keratosis. Notably here, you have to trigger this after you've suffered the damage. So if a severe injury kills you, whoops. So don't hold off too long on triggering this. Also notably, it doesn't just fix the location that's been hit, it fixes all of your locations and it can go past your starting amounts. So this is quite nice. Basically, if you're going to run this, you run up, you tank a hit from the monster and you trigger it immediately. When we get to age 2, we gain the Grace of Dominatus Secret Fighting Art. So, also, this, I love this art, and I really want to see this rendered. I want to see all of these rendered, they're gorgeous, but this one in particular, absolutely love it. Okay, so, Grace of Dominatus, we've got another one of these, well, this is like a pinhead. Who knows who this really is? Hopefully that's answered one day. But we have, if you can't, you may concentrate, and if you do, you get to Grace of Dominatus at the start of your next act. Same things as previously. Grace of Dominatus has you reach into the dream and remove a twisting green crown. The crown explodes, a glittering rain of shards coats the survivors. All survivors gain armor equal to all hit. Let's start again, shall we? All survivors gain armor at all hit locations equal to your green affinities. They may remove up to the same number of tokens. That could be bleeding, negative tokens, whatever, infectious lunacy tokens from the butcher, priority target token, bye. Then you gain +6 hunt XP, and if you still exist, you gain the priority target token. So if you think about this, and say we put our green saviour in leather armour, okay, so, and give them monster grease and a leather shield. So they've got 3 from their armour set and all their gear grid, plus an extra one for 4. So that is all survivors gaining 4 armour points at all hit locations, including yourself if you don't disappear, which you probably don't want to do unless things are desperate. That's a heck of a lot of durability. Most monsters are not going to be able to cut through that. That's 20 armor points per survivor extra. It's really, really strong. The main negative is that, unlike the Beast of Keratosis, where maybe you could throw yourself away on your second attack, second activation even, you probably don't want to be pulling that trigger because it's likely your green savior is your main tank and you really want to benefit from these extras. So the negative here is you can usually only use this once, and then it's time to look for a replacement tank really, or let them just suck it up. However, I really like this when you're going against a tough monster for the first time ever and you're not sure what's going to happen and you want a safety valve to, panic button, or when you're fighting a nemesis monster. It's always nice to have another, one of these that just goes, okay, things are going bad, boom, reset, you're back in the room, we're good to go. Our last one is the Dream of the Lantern. The newborn savior gains 1 permanent blue affinity, +1 permanent luck, and the following abilities. Lucine. Before making a wound attempt, you may declare Lucine X in a loud booming voice. If you do, that wound attempt gains X luck. X cannot be more than your total blue affinities. When the attack ends, gain +X hunt XP. Same template as the previous two. Notably, this one's very narrow. You're only getting to do one location and you're not necessarily getting a guaranteed critical wound from it. But that can be pretty helpful. And we do have gear grids that tend to pack a lot of blue into the single grid. So it's fairly easy to get this to a good number. I think 6 is fairly viable within the core game alone if you want to do that. But ultimately, the big thing we're doing here is that when we get to age 2, we gain Lucine's Lantern Secret Fighting Art. And it might not be pronounced Lucine, by the way. I'm just freeballing that. I've never really known. But it might be Lucine. But anyway, you get Lucine's Lantern Secret Fighting Art. This is my favourite of the bunch. You may concentrate. If you do, perform Lucine's Lantern at the start of your next act. We know how that works. Lucine's Lantern. You reach into the dream and excise a screeching skull darker than darkness. It hurtles at the monster. Just absolute all-time banging text there. I love it. Darker than darkness. I mean, it's edgy as heck and I am here for it. Reveal hit locations equal to half your blue affinities, rounded down, one at a time. The monster suffers a critical wound at any locations with a critical wound effect. Ignore the effects of the trap, then reshuffle the hit location deck so the discard pile's going back in there as well. Gain +6 hunt XP. As mentioned, we can easily get ourselves to 6 affinities. We can also usually quite easily get to about 8. Additionally, this is one we want 2 blasts from. So potentially you can trot out a blue savior into a showdown, hit the monster twice with Lucine's Lantern and score 6, maybe even 8 critical wounds. That will generate a bunch of resources that will pop you possibly a bunch of persistent injuries. It's super good. And this is my preferred use for saviors. Is basically I make a factory of blue ones and I use them to generate extra resources. You'll crack the first one near the start with the Lucine's Lantern, fairly early on, maybe even as an opening salvo, and then you'll finish the showdown with another big old blast. The survivor ceases to exist, savior ceases to exist, savior survivor, and hopefully you generate a bunch of extra resources and have an easier showdown. I really like this. This is, as I said, my usual use for them is basically to generate resources, which makes up for them being kind of disposable. But yeah, that's the reason why I don't think red is particularly as good, because blue is kind of doing what red does, but in some ways better. It's not hitting as many hit locations, but you are not caring about drawing the trap. That's not there to mess you up and give you +6 hunt XP for no value. You just blank the trap and deal with the rest. And it can do a ton of great things. It's only bad against monsters that no-sell critical hits like the Butcher. So I think there's arguments for using both of these two and their different tools for different situations. I think generally though, this one I'm not taking this. I don't know any situation where I would want the Dream of the Beast over the Dream of the Lantern. And that's why I said at the top of this, I think there's no right answer, but I think there is a wrong answer. And I'm sorry, as sweet as this artwork is, and this artwork is sweet, no. Sorry. Now it's time for us. First of all, me to go. I thought I'd get this done in 30 minutes and it is 45 minutes later. And secondly, it's time for us to go through the timeline. So I will get to the Hooded Knight at the same time that I talk about Hands of Heat, because usually those two coincide together. Hopefully as well this should be a bit faster, because I'm not going to go into each of the monsters in massive amounts of detail. I'm more going to talk about what I think are the 4 goals, and those are the Butcher, the Kingsman, the Watcher, and the Goldsmoke Knight. And that's why I talk about eras. You've got early game, your mid game, your late game, and then your end game. Or if you like, pre-Butcher, pre-Kingsman, pre-Watcher, pre-Goldsmoke Knight. We have our first day, returning survivors, we talked about that. This is introductory events, we don't worry about that. So the very first thing we want to consider is the Butcher. Our buddy here, one of the best monsters in the game, really well designed, absolutely love it. The main thing we're looking for is to handle the strengths of the Butcher and leverage against its weaknesses. So the Butcher's strengths are dealing bleed tokens, dealing direct attacks via bite to the head, thereby having a fair chance to automatically kill someone, and having a lot of ferocity and also piling on that infectious lunacy and causing survivors to suffer from a gradually increasing amount of speed and strength. The speed naturally results in eventually hitting the trap. Now, a key thing to look at and note with that is if we take a brief look and zip over to the severe injuries. Hey, I almost didn't show the dreaded naked man. Almost. If we look at Frenzy here, we'll see you gain +1 d5 insanity, +1 speed, +1 strength, and we ignore slow on melee weapons. So one of the traps the Butcher's trying to suck survivors into is making their speed so high that they sadly end up constantly hitting the trap. You also can't use fighting arts, you may not use weapon specialization or mastery, and you can gain this multiple times. A big note here, slow on ranged weapons still counts, so if you can get yourself a slow ranged weapon, you can actually just take advantage of the additional strength. So that's something to consider and think about. But anyway, otherwise, what we're looking to do is cover the bleed issue and also get ourselves lots of evasion, because the Butcher suffers with kind of bad accuracy for a monster. It has a lot of 3+4+ attacks, still pretty good, but if you have Monster Grease plus Rawhide and then you've got your ability to dodge, at least until Infectious Lunacy kicks in and frenzies you, then you can manage to soak a lot of its hits and make them miss, which sometimes is one of the few ways you'll get around a lot of the scarier stuff. If you're concerned about bite, I already mentioned Dried Acanthus. This is great. You can pick up some of this from hunting a single Screaming Antelope. You do that before getting to the Butcher, then you can make a bunch of Dried Acanthus, make sure everyone's got one, and so if he is a biter, then at least the first time it happens to a given survivor, they don't have their head popped off immediately. The Manhunter, if you do play with it, actually same things. Dried Acanthus is a bit less important, but bandages, evasion, and then otherwise in both cases you just want enough strength to be able to get past the weapon cap. Be aware, as I mentioned before, the Butcher doesn't suffer critical wounds, so don't bother taking in Lucky Charms. There's only one location you can crit, and you know it's not really worth trying to play for that generally. It's also always worth trying to death blow the Butcher, so even though he has fast target and constantly reshuffles his hit location deck, I do really like to have hit location scouting, because when he's low on wounds, having that ability to try and get the death blow is huge, because of course the Butcher offers us the Mask Maker, which is a really cool location. This mask is incredibly good. These masks give us access to cool legendary monsters. This is a fun location to get, and the earlier you get it, the more you can experiment with it, and I think it's really sweet. Otherwise, on our core quarries, I like to get the Catgut Bow. The Whisker Harp's very strong against the Butcher. It's a heavy mood monster. As mentioned, Line Beast Guitar not so great. King Spear great. Reach weapons, range weapons, they're really nice to have. Over here, I really like Brain Mint. I think Brain Mint is phenomenally good because it will clear a whole bunch of scary things, and it can be used when you're knocked down. This can be a lifesaver. It's just kind of hard to get to happen. But it's unlikely you'll have a full set of Screaming Armor by the time you get to the Butcher. Possible, but unlikely. Once we've gotten past the Butcher, our next goal is the Kingsman. So, while I remember, one of the things to pay attention to with the Butcher is if you do lose, the Butcher's going to destroy all your resources. So if you're not feeling confident, spend all your resources. The Kingsman, on the other hand, if you lose, is just going to break your pottery. So don't innovate pottery before the first Kingsman turns up. Now, that actually might happen a little earlier than you think, because if we go back to the timeline, we can see right after the Butcher we have our Hands of Heat, and then we have the Kingsman turning up. So let's go to Hands of Heat, and then we'll look at Hooded Stranger as well. We got Pup Yups. I don't know what she's dreaming about, but it's really cute. Oh, she's growling as well. I'll try and carry on. I think she'll stop in a moment. Okay, Hands of Heat. This happens after the Butcher. Mystery of the Lantern's Glow. So, if the settlement already innovated Lantern Oven, you skip this event and roll on the Lantern branding table. Otherwise, proceed with Hands of Heat below. Don't innovate the Lantern Oven before Hands of Heat. Just don't do it. You get it for free. It's always better to get things for free if you can. That means you can spend more effort innovating elsewhere. One lucky day, a clumsy accident knocks a lantern free from the towering lantern horde. A sudden flash of heat bathes the survivors as the lantern crashes to the ground. Now shattered, the lantern light dies, but the seed of an idea begins to grow. You nominate a survivor, they gain +1 courage and experiment with lanterns. My recommendation here is to pick a survivor who is what I call a pleb. They haven't done anything yet. They're not bad, but they've not been out on any hunts. And the reason for that is on this 1 to 3 roll, an agitated lantern shatters in the survivor's face, badly burned and disfigured. They're exiled from the settlement as an inhuman monster. However, other survivors learn something from this tragedy. You get the Lantern Oven innovation, but you lose 1 population, and it's that survivor, and you add Bone Witch to the timeline 3 lantern years from now. That can have some benefits, as we'll see when we look at the Armored Strangers. Bone Witch does have a bit of an interaction with that, but on the whole, we'd rather not have this result. On a 4, 5, or a 6, the survivor vigorously shakes a lantern and holds it watchfully. It bursts into blue light with a distinct hissing sound. The lantern grows hot in the survivor's clenched hands, burning their flesh. They bellow in primal triumph. You gain +1 permanent strength and the Red Fist secret fighting art, and again the Lantern Oven innovation. Red Fist is really good. It gives everyone +1 strength token when they arrive at the showdown, and additionally it lets them spend a strength token instead of survival to activate survival actions. That will work even when you're frenzied. So that's really, really nice. It is such a powerful ability. But on a 7+, we get the Lantern Oven innovation as the survivor discovers heat and the settlement celebrates. The survivor also gets the Red Fist secret fighting art, and we get to roll on the Lantern branding table. Lantern branding. is a feast culminating in the ritual branding of the settlement's finest warriors by the heat of an agitated lantern. We discard half of the settlement's total resources, including storage rounded down. As I mentioned, you already shouldn't really have anything in your storage when fighting the butcher, but if you do, it's going here. I actually think it's still a price worth paying if you happen to have stored some scrap or whatever. So, on a 1 to 3 tradition, all departing survivors gain +10 survival, add Hands of Heat to the timeline 1d10 for years from now. This is actually my favourite result, because Hands of Heat can bring us back Red Fist again on a later survivor, and I really like that. 4 to 7, the nominated survivor gets +1 permanent speed as their feet get branded. 8 to 9, branded hand, +1 permanent strength. 10 plus accident, suffer the blinded sphere, head injury, and gain +1 permanent luck. A reasonable trade. Minus accuracy, plus luck. Hopefully you don't lose the other eye. So this is a pretty good event. As I say, I think my preference is to have this into the tradition, so it'll come back a bit later, and I can have Red Fist turn up on a new survivor, hopefully. But again, as I said, you probably don't want to have anything in the settlement storage before you face the butcher, so you should be able to work around that potential costing of the lantern branding, and don't innovate the lantern oven first. Right, this way brings us to the Hooded Knight. A stranger emerges from the darkness. If any survivor has the Twilight Sword, they duel the knight, otherwise his motives are inscrutable and you roll below on the mysterious agenda. So, mysterious agenda first. Roll 1d10. 1 to 2, as quickly as you arrive, the Hooded Knight vanishes in a flash of steel and blood. You suffer -2 population, and the Hooded Knight leaves with unfinished business and will return later. This can actually be really nasty. There is a little bit of a compensation coming in further on, so a area you can game if this does happen. Unfinished business means he's coming back in 4 years' time. 3, 4, 5, 6. The Hooded Knight insists on training the uncouth survivors in martial combat. Up to 2 survivors may spend 3 resources each to learn the Mighty Strike fighting art, and he leaves with unfinished business and returns later. This many resources for Mighty Strike is no. No matter how rich and wealthy I am, that's terrible. 1 resource each, maybe. 7, 8, 9 on a 10. The Hooded Knight forces a tattered parcel into the hands of the returning survivor with the most hunt XP. If tied, randomise, and leaves with unfinished business. If there are no returning survivors because everyone died, then the knight leaves with unfinished business. Okay, so this tattered parcel is the survivor gains the Twilight Sword rare gear and places it in their gear grid now. The survivor may select Twilight Sword as their weapon proficiency type. This weapon is cursed. Cursed means it cannot be removed from your gear grid for any reason. When you die, you archive this card. Okay, so this brings us to a little point where we generally have to game the system. When we know that we're coming back from a hunt and we are going to be triggering the Hooded Knight because we have reached that milestone, and he's coming. Generally, we want to send out survivors who do not have weapon mastery, because the Twilight Sword is kind of a silver bullet meant to help our settlement, but it really sucks for it to land on somebody who's already been training something else. So pay attention to your number of innovations. Remember, innovations and principles are different. You're looking for the word innovation. And note that you've already got 1 at the start from language, and you will have gained 1 through lantern here, so that's 2. So really you only need to have innovated 3 times before this threshold is met. Maybe less if you picked Ammonia earlier from the Gorm or the White Lion. So, as I say, you look at it, you go, okay, when we come back, the Hooded Knight is turning up. So we send out all our survivors who have no hunt XP, or they have, say, 1 hunt XP. So when they come back, one of them can take the sword, all fine and good, and they can start training it. The Hooded Knight is a member of the Twilight Order, and it's pretty interesting what they're doing. We'll talk a little bit about that in the lore section at the end. So before we get to the dueling, let's go and have a little look at the Twilight Sword down here. You see they're here together just after the Butcher. Right, so Twilight Sword has 1 speed, a accuracy's 9 minus the proficiency level, so the higher your accuracy gets, the higher your proficiency level gets, the more accurate it becomes. It also is slow, so capped at 1 speed. Cursed, as mentioned above. Cumbersome, you cannot move and attack with this. We discussed how that works with the Bone Sword, Bone Club. Is sentient. This one's a real drag. Sentient means you have to be insane to be able to use it. If you're struggling with that, the Allison white box, which hopefully comes to the simulator, gives you some gear to help you handle the Twilight Sword early on. So I do recommend it. It's quite a nice box set again. I also, while we're at it, recommend the white speaker white box. That's got really good dagger in it that'll help with fist and tooth, so you know, some recommendations for physical. This has devastating 2 when fighting the Watcher, and this is the reason why you've been given this, because it's here to help you with the problem that's coming. The other problem though is Twilight Sword proficiency is a little awkward. It also levels up in a different way to others. So you can see rank 2 is where you first get a benefit, and you get to ignore Cumbersome on the Twilight Sword. Before then, there's a couple of ways you can handle Cumbersome. You can use it like the Bone Club, where basically you play tank and you ensure that the monster comes to you, so you can just hit the monster. Or you can use a monster movement armor set like the White Lion armor or the full Screaming Antelope set or Phoenix armor. They'll let you move in a certain way and activate a weapon to attack, so you can get around Cumbersome like that. At 4, rank 4, you will get to ignore slow and you get +2 speed, so the weapon really starts to scale up. And then at 6, Twilight Sword gains deadly. Now, an important thing to note here is you do not want to master this weapon before the Watcher turns up if you want to make use of it, because unfortunately mastery has your weapon master leave the settlement, heeding the call of the order, and they're gone. You can put the sword in another survivor's gear grid, or you can just throw it away and archive it, but the Hooded Knight might have some concern about that. If things are getting a little too high, remember that you can always use family to pass on weapon proficiency ranks, and it's definitely worth doing that with Twilight Sword, so you kind of have a backup for a situation where maybe this survivor unexpectedly leaves or they die and you're looking to try, and you then have to, like, you know, go out with some fresh new survivors so they can get the sword returning next time the Hooded Knight turns up and goes, hey, what did you do with my sword? Why did you leave it lying around out there in the darkness? Anyway, when you do have the sword, you want to be working on it, and the reason for that is this duel results. So if a survivor has the Twilight Sword, they have to duel, and they roll 1d10 and they get to add 1 for each of the Twilight Sword weapon proficiency levels they have. So hopefully by the time the Hooded Knight comes back, you're at a +4 maybe, if you've timed this really well, or at least a +2 or +3. And the reason for that is on a 1 to 3, the survivor perishes quickly and disappointed the knight leaves never to return. Now this does give you an option. You could, if you don't care at all about leveling up the Twilight Sword, and you don't necessarily need it automatically to handle the Watcher, it's helpful, but it's not needed. Goes a flap of the dog. You can just let them die here. On a 4 to 7, the survivor is badly wounded. They suffer the gaping chest wound, severe injury, and then the knight returns with his unfinished business for another duel a bit later. 8, 9, you gain a level of weapon proficiency, which that's nice. You lose all survival, and you can't gain survival the settlement phase, so you're probably not going on a hunt. That's going to leave other survivors to do that. At a 10, you gain 1 level of weapon proficiency, and a knight has unfinished business. We'll turn again. An 11 plus is 2 levels, 1 insanity and 1 survival gained, and it returns on unfinished business. This is why I was talking about how you might accidentally push past the level too much, and that can be a little awkward. So it's nice they use family to have extra Twilight sword proficiencies, so somebody else can grab it if your survivor leaves off this result. Yeah, or you can just be like, I don't care anymore, and just play without the sword entirely. I didn't talk about this on the table, but there's this whole section with records. If you've innovated records, you'll see that the Hooded Knight seems disturbed. They'll either destroy records, or they will start the Watcher with 2 less life, which is quite nice. Records is quite a high-tech level innovation, so you won't run into this too often. There's nothing you can do if it does happen. I think it's actually, generally if you've innovated records, it's fine to do this and not worry too much about it getting destroyed if it does. But if you are concerned about that, if you don't want to get set back on your innovations, just don't bother with this until the Hooded Knight is finished with all of his nonsense. Okay, so then we have Armoured Strangers. I am not going to get this under 2 hours, am I? Whew. Okay, fine. We started, so we'll finish. Right, Armoured Strangers is when the Kingsmen first turn up. You're visited by enigmatic figures, fully enclosed in armour. They march silently through the settlement, the only noise is a metallic clang as they pause before each survivor and tap their lantern halberds against the ground. The survivors have no choice but to helplessly wait their mute deliberations. We add the Kingsmen to the Nemesis encounter list, and the Strangers count people and take action based on the population total. So, this is a big thing. If you are on 7 population and you've got past the Butcher on that kind of number, you maybe want to just leave it at 7, because this supportive action actually has some really nice stuff to it. Don't worry if you're past. Don't deliberately kill some survivors off. That's like, being at 7 or less population is not a number I want to be on. That is like, you lose one showdown and you're in dire straits on the next one. A very bad case. But if you happen to be post Butcher with like 7 or less population, maybe chill for a bit and hold it there until this resolves. Okay, 7 or less is supportive action. Finally, one of them drives a lantern halberd into the ground. They leave without a word. You add the guidepost innovation to the settlement. The Strangers plan to return. Add Armoured Strangers to the timeline 4 years from now, and you roll on the table. Okay, so the guidepost innovation is a nice little thing. It disables Clinging Mist, so you don't get to reset your timeline via that card. But you can rip it up the ground if you want to and get a lantern halberd. Lantern halberd's a fairly decent weapon. It's even upgradable if you have patterns from the Gambler's Chest, so that's nice. The table 1 to 3, a survivor's ears fill with a painful static. A random returning survivor gains a random disorder. 4 to 7, the Armoured Strangers dump a mangled, unidentified corpse in the ground. You gain 3 random basic resources. And then 8 plus, the Armoured Strangers haul in a massive, bountiful beast corpse. The survivors wonder at the boon. You gain 6 random basic resources, and departing survivors gain +1 survival. So, this supportive action is them trying to stop the settlement from getting wiped. On an 8 or more, they perform a destructive action. So they, like, if you've got 8 survivors, they're like, oh boy, there's too many here. 1 to 4, they wantonly execute survivors. You suffer -4 population. You may resist to avoid this loss. Resist is having a special showdown against the Kingsman, level 1 immediately here. And you will have the showdown, and any survivors will come back. If anyone dies, graves or generate endeavours. This 1 to 4 result you're always resisting, because losing 4 survivors is better than losing 5. On a 5 to 7, the bravest survivors are rounded up, and we select the survivor with the highest courage and execute them. Again, we can resist to avoid this loss. A bit more of a decision to make here. Depends how good that highest courage survivor is, how many other survivors you have that you could afford to throw away to save them. So that's a situational thing, you'll think about that. On an 8 to 9, they destroy a random innovation. Return the lost innovation to the settlement's innovation deck. You may choose to resist to avoid this loss. That can be really bad. You could lose something quite significant, so it depends what's going on there. You're normally going to have to resist it. On 10 plus, we get the halberd. but a survivor is impaled on it. As a reminder, we lose 1 population and get a guidepost. Fine. Very unlikely to get that result. As I say, you can't curate your population too well to handle this, but you know, if you get there and you're approaching Lantern Year 6 and you have 7 population, it's time to throttle off just for a little bit and ride the lightning with that 7 population just to get this benefit. Bunch of resources, guideposts, that's all good. And this brings us back to the timeline and preparation for either the unfortunate special showdown we're having right now, or more likely, or hopefully, the actual encounter in Lantern Year 9, which is one we'll probably have the most time to prepare for. What we want there is leather for the protection, for ignoring bash, and we want shields. Round leather shield, knuckle shield if you've got the gorm, whatever, just shields. The Kingsman's main gimmicks, he has a weakness to daggers, but it's not really good enough to specifically aim for daggers unless you have good daggers already. But it does do a bit of bashing as well, which is why leather's so great. The shield protection in particular, shields no sell the trap. You just don't take any damage at all from the trap if you have a shield. So that's our big thing. And so you can see it kind of ties nicely that we're going rawhide for handling the butcher, leather for handling the Kingsman. After that we get to heading towards the hand. Just get shields again. There's no real important steps to take as far as the hand goes. So we're going to just brush past that, except for talking about the regal visit and then our conviction principle. There we are. Okay, so the regal visit has the hand turn up. The hand is kind of a big deal. The hand is also one of the entities I really love. I think it's a fantastically fun entity. The hand strides into the settlement. The survivors' thoughts vanish as they fall to their knees, struck dumb by its glorious, incomprehensible presence. We add the hand to the Nemesis encounter list, and we'll have it in 2 years' time, and the hand begins the inspection. Okay, we roll dice. On a 1 to 3 in one swift motion, the lantern draws its sword, cleaving the lantern oven and 4 survivors asunder. Suffer -4 population, lose the lantern oven, or we can challenge the hand to lose this loss. Challenge is a special showdown against the hand. Always challenge the hand. This special showdown is just kind of fine. You should have shields by now. You should have everything you need to fight the hand by the time the regal visit turns up, because you've got it all when preparing for the Kingsman. So this is not a big deal. This fight's actually a nice benefit. However, if you've accepted darkness, the hand presents 2 infants to the survivors on a roll of 2 over 3, and we gain +2 population. I talked about this back in the Great Game Hunters episodes, but we can see that the King faction, or the Hand faction, the King's faction, the Scribes faction, they are kind of curating settlements to a certain way, likely to make them as appetizing as possible for the King and the Scribe. Okay, in a 4, 5, 6 or 7, the hand rampages through the settlement. We lose any resources in the settlement storage and suffer -1 population. We can challenge this to avoid this loss. Again, as I said, no problem challenging, but if you have the guidepost, the hand demonstrates sophisticated fighting arts, and we gave 1 weapon mastery of our choice and added to the settlement. This is really good. This is one of the reasons why you might end up kind of lowballing your population when you approach the armored strangers and not try and push past, because this is a free shield or fist and tooth mastery. Really like that. That's fantastic. It can be anything else as well if you want, as long as specialization is quite good. Spear, that's another one with a very good specialization. Sword, not bad. Axe, not so much. On an 8, 9 or a 10, the hand points at the survivor or survivors with the most hunt experience. A warble is trapped in their throats as their chest bursts open, expelling their organs, killing them. You have to challenge the hand to avoid this loss. On a 9 or a 10, if you have survival of the fittest, then the hand's voice sounds in all the survivors' heads. None can recall what happens, but each feels profoundly changed. You can't spend any evasions this settlement phase, but all living survivors gain +1 permanent strength. Not bad again, another reason to consider survival of the fittest over protect the young. But as I said before, this special showdown, not a big deal. Okay, and then we have our conviction principle. So unlike the others, conviction is set on the timeline and you're going to ask to choose between these two. I'm just going to tell you, currently there's no reason to pick anything different. Romantic is what you pick. +1 survival limit, yep, pretty standard. But whenever you gain a fighting art, draw 3 fighting arts and select 1 to keep. That's really good. Well, that is really, really good. And if we have arc survivors, well, it turns out that picking romantic there gives us access to an amazingly good philosophy. So we pick romantic. Basically, barbaric is a stinking pile of garbage and needs work. We need a barbaric principle, barbaric philosophy for arc survivors. We need a better barbaric principle. It needs a redesign. There is no choice that I think is worth, so I'm not going to worry too much about going through this. The only penalty is this Bone Witch turning up, but there's benefits to the Bone Witch anyway. It's not always bad. The one thing that I will say is a benefit of barbaric is if you manage to roll this Thundercaller result, that will allow you to encounter the Cyclops Knight and get access to the Thunderhammer, which is used in some patterns if you have the pattern system from the Gambler's Chest. But for the most part, I don't give a hoot about this. I'm all about that romance. Okay, so this period here now, post-hand, or in fact even post-conviction, is what I tend to refer to as the Teenage Wastelands, in reference to Barbara O'Reilly. This is a period where you're kind of left to do your own device, and it's a pretty long period. We do have a level 2 Butcher or whatever that node monster turning up. We have a level 2 Kingsman or whatever node that is turning up. If you've got one of the others there instead, it'll be that. But for the most part, what you're working towards is preparing for this event here. So this is Watched. Let us read through Watched, because this is the big sort of rug pull for the settlement. This is the big reveal that we talked a little bit about earlier on. Okay, so this is the really cool piece of artwork that shows the survivors discovering what's going on. I think this piece is really evocative. Love this here. But essentially what happens is dark spots spread across the Lantern Horde. A nervous hush falls over the settlement. Slowly, the most daring survivors peer past the darkened lanterns, venturing beneath them into a vast chamber, unknown and undreamed of. Slumbering in the centre of the chamber, the survivors could feel a presence of immense danger. Their ultimate predator would soon wake, extinguishing the lantern light that holds the endless darkness at bay. Starting with this settlement phase, your survivors may awaken and face the sleeping menace. You may move Nemesis Encounter Watcher to the current year. You cannot move it to a year that already has a Nemesis Encounter on the timeline, and the settlement has a different response to discovery based on their conviction. So we have either the barbaric response or the romantic response. The barbaric response is the survivors decide they must craft the perfect weapon to prepare themselves. You gain the ultimate weapon innovation. This doesn't count towards your settlement's innovation total. You can see these are not actually listed as being an innovation on there. And then you roll dice. On a 1 to 5, you get Hands of Heat, added to the timeline 4 years from now. On a 6, 7, 8, 9, or 10, survivor decides their true hero. They gain plus 10 insanity in the Quixotic disorder. Name of Don Quixote. Obviously, Hands of Heat, as I said before, is really great. But this, not interested in this. The romantic response, the survivors decide they must learn the perfect fighting art to protect themselves. They gain the final fighting art innovation. This does not count towards the settlement's innovation total. You roll a dice. On a 1, 2, 3, 4, or 5, a survivor runs off and becomes a bone witch. This is a fairly common occurrence for romantic settlements, sure. On a 7, 8, 9, or 10, survivor bursts into unhealthy after. They gain plus 10 insanity, plus 1 permanent strength, and the immortal disorder. So that's all kind of better than this, really, if I'm honest. We have both of the two different options here. So what we have is plus 1 survival limit for both of them. Once per showdown on final fighting art, you may select a card from the discard pile or wound stack and place it on top of the AI deck. I'm still not 100% sure if, because it says select, you can kind of look through the wound stack. I believe you can. That's okay. It's not like super amazing, but it is a nice benefit, especially taking a bad AI card from the discard pile and putting it back on top. That can be very strong. Ultimate weapon, whenever you defeat a monster, you gain 1 monster resource of your choice from its resource deck. Now, on paper, definitely seems stronger than final fighting art, but the truth is, if you've made it to this part of the campaign, you should be swimming in resources. You're not bothered too much about this. You care about specific resources that tend to come as rewards, like indomitable ones. I don't know if this works on indomitable resources. It's not a question I've ever asked, but I don't think so, because it says it's resource deck, which is why I never bothered double checking. So this isn't as strong as you'd think, and this actually is an incredibly powerful tool that can just win showdowns. So again, I think that romantic just keeps on winning. But our big thing that we have to seriously think about here is this bit about waking the watcher. And this is where we're going to talk briefly about the king and about some various things to consider here. So by the magic of me pausing this video and popping back over here, we're now back on the timeline and we can see a couple of key things. So this is the big thing to note. The Watcher's toughness is equal to the current lantern year on the settlement. And if you have records, the monster even has +2 toughness. This is like a thematic thing to do with the Watcher. Luckily, the Hooded Knight has hopefully either given you -2 toughness to so reduced, affected it with his thing to try and make it a little bit easier, or preferably just ripped it down. As I said, usually I don't want to be making records, certainly not in this particular situation. I don't think records is great, but the key thing here is, oh boy, this means this monster starts at a minimum of 20 toughness. That's a pretty big number. If we briefly pop back over and take a look at our blacksmith weapons, let's have a look. So if we just consider the lantern sword, this is base 3 strength, and we got sharp, so potentially we could roll 13, have 13 strength on there. That's still, with a maximum sharp roll, we need to get 7 strength off our attack dice and wherever else we're getting it from, and that is a really unlikely circumstance. If we look at our Dragon Slayer, it's a bit better. We got a base of 9. But what I'm saying here is 20 is a big number, and what's terrifying is this just keeps going up. If you don't wake the Watcher here, then it's at 21. Now it's at 22. You're not allowed to do it here. The Butcher's here, the level 3 Butcher's here to make your life miserable. So then you have to do it at 24. And if you don't do that, you have to do it 25. And again, if you've made records and the Hooded Knight's not ripped it down, that could be 27. Those are really big numbers. Like, I cannot stress how large those numbers are for the situation in which you're in. So it is in your best interest to wake the Watcher as soon as you're ready, so you can leverage all the advantages you have. Hopefully the Twilight Sword can help you here. Founding Stones are actually quite good against the Watcher as well, so if you got any of them, that can be a nice little extra benefit there. I mean, the Watcher only has 15 life points at this point, and you also do have a little bit of extra help with this retinue ability that can increase your strength further. But just be aware, the difference between 20 toughness and 25 toughness is way bigger than just 5 points. Because as these points climb, there's a curve that they get harder and harder to hit. And so do not delay. But there is an exception. Now that exception is the King. You see, once the Watcher is dead, you are locked into fighting monsters at level 3. Jumping in to face the King immediately at level 3 is a bit of a large hurdle to overcome. And the King doesn't have its introductory event until Lantern Year 22 with the Awaited. But what you can do is, if you want to properly experience the King, you can delay and you can hunt the King at level 1 at 22 and then level 2 at 24, and that should be enough resources to give you some really good weapons and hopefully a full set of King armor. It's quite a generous monster because you don't have a lot of time to fight it, and that should set you up to handle the Watcher. So that was the thing I was talking about with the King. If you're going to include the King in this campaign, you've got to be like, okay, we are hunting the King here, we are hunting the King here, level 1, level 2, and hopefully you're playing with Ark survivors because generally you need that extra push to be strong enough to handle it. I do believe if you want to see someone who does this, I think Trent Dennison, Big Dino, on one of his playthroughs does People of the Lantern with the King included, if I remember correctly. Even if I don't remember correctly, you should just watch Trent play. Trent's really good at this game. Highly recommend watching his campaigns. He's just a better player than I am. Those who can do, I guess, and those who can't sit here and talk for nearly 2 hours about this campaign. Yeah. Anyway, the Watcher has a number of silver bullets to help you take it out. Retinue helps. Founding Stones are actually really good, as I mentioned, and the Twilight Sword can help you as well. So there are ways of getting around this. Just be smart about it and be aware every time you delay, you do make this monster tougher and tougher, and that can become more and more unassailable. But once you've defeated the Watcher, well, I won't read the full result of Blackout as it happens because my voice is going, but the key thing to note is you'll lose your ultimate weapon or final fighting out. This is part of the reason why I'm like, an ultimate weapon, yeah, right, you know, it's, yeah, who cares. And you gain a new innovation of Destiny. Now you're also going to lose the ability to innovate normally. That's because the light of your inspiration is gone. You killed the thing that was supplying all those ideas, the Watcher. Instead, you'll find, though, within the Watcher's lantern toggle mass is this thing inside the Watcher's corpse, I should say. And this like goes to a new way that things are going to be handled. And instead of innovating now, we'll be doing a thing called Lantern Research, which is the other way. Is it? Oh, I think it might even just be in with the normal stuff, which always surprises me, because the Watcher's stuff is segregated away a bit further out near the end to try and hide the mystery, but for some reason I think these ones are just in here. Yeah, they are. Yeah. Okay. Right. So we'll come back to that in a second. Now I've got the right page. Here's our exhausted lantern horde. So first of all, the sleeping predator is gone. Without its protective presence, intelligent monsters draw near, so we can only hunt level 3 plus monsters. These are the big bad ones, the ones who were like, we're not coming near, this watch is super dangerous, but now it's gone, it's feeding time. So instead of previously, where only the dumb, young, foolish monsters would be close by, because the others were like, we're not going near that, now, you know, they're in for feeding time. Interestingly, in the original 1.31 version, this was kind of the end game. What happened is the Watcher died, you got a exhausted lantern horde that basically said you were on a boss rush mode with more and more dangerous monsters, and they got tougher and tougher and tougher and tougher, and then eventually you'd fail and the settlement would die. So you was like, well done, you know, you complete the campaign, good job. If you want to keep going, you can see how long you can last, or, you know, what we'd often do there is just hit a deja vu off a phoenix and reset the timeline. Kind of fun. I do miss that. I'll talk a little bit about that in my review and wrap up section, but this still is thematically very cool and strong. You'll notice, as I said, the light of inspiration is extinguished. You cannot innovate. This is replacing your innovating. This is a new process where we're going to make gear. I've talked about this location in particular in detail in the Exhausted Lantern Horde and You video. You can also make Survivor's Lanterns, because you will need lanterns to depart, as mentioned above. And you can get resources down here. Hopefully you have some with legendary lungs still kicking around so they can do this job. There's no real penalty for going down here if you have legendary lungs. Otherwise you're sending plebs down you don't care about. So, lantern research. Here we are. Got this cool little piece of artwork. And then this is our new innovation system. I do not have the voice to read all of this, so please do forgive me on that. I've been trying to get all of this done because I have 2 days before we get the Black Friday update rolls out, and I want to get this all recorded before the hovel reset happens there. So, first key thing, somebody always has to depart as long as we have the final lantern. We do not want to lose the final lantern, so there's this rule of like the final lantern will get passed on to someone else. If somebody, if the carrier dies with it, you'll generally discard the other lantern that survivor's carrying to make room for it there. At the start of the showdown, you'll get this horripilation status card. We'll take a look at that in a moment. The survivor holding the final lantern starts with the death die and the horripilation. We'll talk about that. This replaces the monster controller tile. That has some connotations with the spidiculous rings that I'm still not fully clear on how it works, so I'm not going to worry about it. And you pass the death die around as the Watcher's final emanations jump between the lanterns of the survivors. You also get these pulse discoveries. This is the thing that you can do, so you'll get that lantern research. I mentioned that on this, on the back here. That's this. And so you'll start leveling this up as you understand how the lantern works. And it gives you a bunch of new abilities. Big key thing, if you lose the final lantern for any reason, you stop losing the death. You'll be able to use the death die, and pulse discoveries, your new version of innovation, loses a lot of its potency because it rotates around the death die. So first, this levels up for 2 hide, 2 bone and 2 organ, so that is like a double version of innovating. That's why I called this innovating. You can see over here it even costs 2 endeavors, so it's twice as expensive. You can afford that, you're fighting level 3s. At level 1 we get aggression overload, so we get to add an attack roll to an attack, which is rolling the death die as an additional attack roll. Nice. But not amazing. I mean, it's kind of just an extra speed, but it's optional, so you can, and it overcomes slow as well because it's an additional attack roll via the death die. Then we have acceleration. Gives you this is level 2, gives you plus 1d10 to a move action. Amazing, movement's really great. There's a load of ways you can make use of that really well. At level 3 we have uninhibited rage, which is plus 1d10 to strength to a wound attempt. This is really important. This is the level you absolutely need to focus and push yourself to. This plus 1d10 strength is quite important for fighting the final nemesis. It's not 100% essential, otherwise the final showdown would be a complete nightmare because only one survivor would be able to attack each round, but it is very helpful. And then level 4 is legs locked. When you gain the death die, you stand and you cannot be knocked down for any reason. That's nice. It's not essential, it's nice. And then at level 5 you get metabolic surrender, which is anytime during the showdown you may roll the death die, you gain twice that much survival, you ignore the negative effects of all permanent injuries, impairments, disorders, negative attributes, all of that jazz, and at the end of the round you die. This is literally the oh goodness I'm gonna die panic button. I don't think this is super great. You don't really need to go to level 5. I think level 3 is absolutely essential. Level 4 is nice bonus. Level 5 if you like. Okay, let's have a little look at Destiny and Horripilation and our death die. In physical, the death die is, at least my copy, is an orange gem-like die, so it's slightly translucent. It's red here in the box. I wonder if later editions updated that or not. I don't know. I don't have a 1.6 edition. Other than that, it's just a nice normal little dice. That did me a favour and decided to roll a Lantern 10, which is great. So over here, our Destiny is a newer survival action. We may spend 7 survival minus our luck to ignore a severe injury before we roll the result. So that's a way of avoiding dying. That's really nice, very helpful. Remember, the level 3 butcher could be kicking around at this time, and that boy loves to bite. Bite is bad. Horripilation. Horripilation is the word for when the hairs on like your skin stand up due to either like cold, fear, or excitement. That's what it means, which is super cool and described there. And we can see we've got just a summary of what we talked about before with respect to the various different levels, just as a reminder. And we'll keep the, not that it, wow, another lantern. You keep the dice on there and pass it around instead of the monster controller. It's very cool. So the other portion of all of this, and this is the pre-Gold Smoke Night, post-Watcher World, is our gearing up to face the old sad robot, the lonely lion, the protector of this realm, old Mr. Choky Smoky himself. And part of that is we can do via this oxidation process. I've talked about this in detail in the And You video, so I'm not going to go back through it in all. Suffice to say, all of these oxidized options are great. I like all of them. They do good things. The best ones are probably the oxidized ring whip and the lantern glaive, and of course the beacon shield. Your crispy bacon shield is phenomenally good with that deflect. So those are the kind of priorities I'm looking to get done and oxidized. The helmet is pretty cool, quite low down on the whole options. Oxidization is an expensive process, and as I said, I've talked about that in detail before. The main thing to note here is we've also got these we can oxidize. That has its little recipe on the white giggle line. You don't have a lot of time if you have delayed. So if you run it to here, then if you look, we haven't got a lot of stuff to get all the bits and pieces we need. But if we've hit it a bit earlier, then we do. So I think if you've hit the king gear, that's generally good enough for the Gold Smoke Knight anyway, because the king gear is designed to face a foe that is this tough and this durable. But without the king, you're going to be wanting to do your oxidization. You want as much time as possible to get that sorted out, because it's going to require various different resources from the Lantern Horde, so the more years you have available, the better. And again, this is another thing of why you want to pull the trigger on Watched and fight the Watcher as soon as you can. It is better to go for the Watcher and take the risk that you might lose than delay it longer and make this final showdown harder. Because sure, if you suffer a game over here, you lose, but the same is sitting here. And don't you want to get to the Gold Smoke Knight? You've played for this long. Don't you want to get there? Don't you want to just take that down and finish it off? And these are the tools here to help you. Because this boy has quite a bit of toughness. To be specific, 27 points of the stuff. That's quite a number to get past. I already talked how awkward it was to handle the Watcher, but it gives you an idea of, in addition, if you are dealing with records and you delay on the Watcher, you're dealing with 27 points of toughness here, and then, that's the same as at the end here. While you have the retinue to help out, that's still quite a tall ask in comparison to up here where we've got oxidized gear and the death dice to help us overcome any issues with wounding. So that is all of that. That's like my various comments and discussions and going through it all, and it's time to talk a little bit about what the story is about in particular, and for that let us pop over to the showdown pages so we can read the lore text for our two antagonists, the Watcher and the Gold Smoke Knight, and then I can talk a little bit more about it all. I'm gonna have to paraphrase some stuff here. I can't provide direct lore quotes and all of this because it's just not entirely present, but I'll explain that in a moment. So anyway, here we are. The Watcher. Long ago, ravenous beasts searched the darkness using their keen senses to find their prey. In the distance, they saw a blooming pillar of light surrounded by tasty morsels bustling in their tiny industry. Licking their chops, they approached, but the beasts halted mid-step. The wind carried a foul, menacing presence. Surely the busy creatures were harmless, yet the menacing warning persisted, felt in their very bones instinctively. The beasts turned away, seeking their meals elsewhere. This doesn't actually tell us anything really specific about the Watcher beyond how dangerous they are. And as a consequence, a lot of what we've learned about the Watchers has come from other sources. And the vast majority of that has come from various interviews that Adam has kindly taken part in during various Gen Cons and similar. And you can see those elsewhere on YouTube. I've not interviewed Adam myself directly, partly because I'm not in the US and partly because I wouldn't want to appear on camera. That's just not my thing. But anyway, additionally we had another bunch of information that came along after the Gold Smoke Knight arrived. So I'm going to read that, and then we're going to talk a little bit about the extra information that we were given from Adam. So, a mantle of ash falls over the settlement as the survivors gather. A roaring gust of cinder blazes through the crowd. The smell of singeing hair and skin stings their nostrils. A flash of light splits the darkness, illuminating the approaching shape of an enormous knight holding a massive ornate maul. Great plumes of inky smoke pour from every gap of the knight's golden armour. The Gold Smoke Knight speaks in an unknown language, its hollow metallic voice echoing from its armour. It stands at ease, awaiting its challengers. So, this is kind of an out of nowhere sort of thing, and one of the things that was sort of talked about, admitted, is that maybe the Gold Smoke Knight could have been better signalled. The Watcher, I think, is incredibly well baked into this campaign. It's there from the very start. You may not realise that it's inside there, but all of the hints are there. Something's feeding this knowledge. Something's providing even this shared experience, which I forgot to get back to talking about. It's quite a good ability, don't forget about it. That's basically it. But all of the knowledge is fountaining from the Watcher. And we're quite curious about all of this. We wanted to know more about the Gold Smoke Knight. And Travis, who formerly wrote for Tech Raptor, had a good enough relationship that he asked Adam about this. And I'm going to paraphrase from memory. This is a number of years ago, but Travis was given permission to share the email and for us to be able to talk about it more. So I may not get Adam's exact wording correct from the email. There's a few key phrases I kind of remember. So the way he described it is that the Watchers, they're constantly erasing history. They're maintaining the status quo, and they range around the place, feeding on things in this same kind of Venus flytrap honeypot kind of way. So we don't know where the origin of the Watchers is. We have some speculation about it. They're very jellyfish-like in their design. They have a lot of dream elements to them. There's a lot of aquatic elements to many monsters in Kingdom Death, so that doesn't necessarily mean anything. Personally, I think they have a bit of a connection to the Ethereal Dreamer, and because, of course, saviors are far more common in Watcher settlements than anywhere else. I don't know if that means the Ethereal Dreamer is the big villain. I used to think that. I'm not so sure anymore, because we have things like the Parasite Queen on the horizon, and that's looking like a candidate for one of the big bads that is sort of, behind all this mess. And the Scribe, of course, is very significantly involved as well, as is the Sculptor or Sculptors. But anyway, Watchers drift around the place, and eventually they need to feed. And to paraphrase Adam, they bury themselves into the ground inside this protective cocoon, the Lantern Cocoon, which you can find pieces of as resources, and they fester like a boil, and the land itself tries to reject them. It pushes them up out of the ground and encases them in this lantern horde. So the lanterns are not necessarily directly part of the Watcher, although the Watcher does have lanterns on them. The lanterns, all these lanterns we see are kind of in the ground. We even see tubes that lay them, we'll find in the thing. I speculatively believe that the spark of life, the spirit, so to speak, exists within these lanterns. We know they're biological, and I think they're quite possibly the spirit that is imbued into the survivors when their bodies are given form from the stone ground via the sculptor's carving and the scribe's writing. Anyway, these Watchers, they give out an aura, as I described and read through that piece of text, that keeps the most dangerous monsters away. They're afraid to go near because Watchers are incredibly dangerous. And in particular, this aura that they project also keeps the Gold Smoke Knight at bay. Now, I've talked about the Gold Smoke Knight a bit in the Dark Bestiary on the White Lions, so I'm not going to go over that in too much detail again here. And I have to say that Adam described the Gold Smoke Knight as kind of the elemental guardian of this place that has become the Plane of Stone Faces. The Gold Smoke Knight has a lot of lion-like elements. I put forward in that video that the Gold Smoke Knight is connected to the White Lion civilization that existed before everything went horribly wrong. This is the corruption. This smoke billowing out represents the corruption to the land. The Gold Smoke Knight has lost his mane. And essentially, once the survivors kill the Watcher, be that with the help of the Twilight Order and their Twilight Sword, or not, the Gold Smoke Knight is coming. The settlement is on a timer, they just don't know it. The Twilight Order probably have some knowledge of this. They definitely seek to oppose Watchers. The Twilight Order is about preservation of knowledge and wherever possible. Watchers obviously are against that. They only generate knowledge by feeding it into survivors' minds, like as little, like seeds, kernels of knowledge, and then the settlement grows up strong around it, and all that wealth of knowledge and memories and people's lives and history becomes food for the Watcher when it awakens. So it's kind of like the Scribe. The Scribe does a similar thing according to the law of scattering, like survivors everywhere and eventually coming back to reap the rewards. We don't know exactly what that's about because we've never had the completion of that story. Hopefully we do one day. It would be really cool to see. It was the original goal for the Lantern Festival, was going to be you beat the Watcher, then you kill the kings, and then you finally kill the Scribe, but that all changed. And we're still left wondering about that. Anyway, our boy the Gold Smoke Knight turns up, and the Gold Smoke Knight's concern here is the Watcher's corpse, specifically the technology that can be brought from that. It is threatening and dangerous to the Gold Smoke Knight. We can see that in how this Horripilation and the Death Dice and the Final Lantern and the Oxidized Gear is effective against the Gold Smoke Knight and can bring it down. Whether permanently or not, we don't know. The Ivory Dragon should answer some questions on that. Again, it's all speculative. We'll see. But essentially, as we can even see if we look at the defeat text, it's here to smash the Watcher's corpse and destroy it. So that's kind of what's here. The story is the story of what happens when a Watcher buries itself, acts as that honeypot, lures those survivors in, but then is overcome by said survivors. If the Watcher wins, we can have a real quick look at that text. It's right here in the defeat. With a great inhalation, the Watcher greedily consumes everyone and everything before travelling for an eon, like 1,000 years, ultimately seeking a new place to hibernate. The time the settlements come to the end, its people in history are forever lost. And we have a kind of, I think, symbolic representation of that happening inside the Watcher's robes. I'm going to enjoy talking about the Watcher when I do the Dark Bestiary video on them sometime in the future. But yeah, that's it. That's kind of the story, is once the Watcher is dead, then the Gold Smoke Knight starts to turn up. I kind of hope that we get a revision of this campaign when Campaigns of Death arrives, because there are a few areas I think could be improved. In particular, something more to signal the arrival of the Gold Smoke Knight between this period, and to really help players understand the importance of what they're doing here would be really helpful. There are hints, but they're nowhere near as well done and put together as the way that the Watcher is signalled in advance through this campaign, with, of course, the Hooded Knight turning up, and the Twilight Order and the Twilight Sword, and the Lantern Horde, and all the little hints along the way. That's really nicely put together. The Watcher feels even like the natural capstone to the campaign, which it was previously. The Gold Smoke Knight just doesn't quite click in properly. The other big, wish I had for the core game is, this is a 30-year campaign. And I guess that's why I'm nearly at 2.5 hours of talking, because there's actually quite a lot going on between these 4 eras that we have happening. That's a lot for a first campaign, and I really wish that the box came with an introductory campaign that said, do this and survive the Butcher. You just play a little 4 or 5 year campaign, and at the end of it goes, congratulations, you survived the Butcher, now let's move on to a bigger campaign. And then I wish the second one actually stopped at defeating the Watcher. I wish it still had that Exhausted Lantern Horde from the old version, and then it had a new Exhausted Lantern Horde for you to open in an envelope. Now, I'm fortunate. That's actually how I've introduced the game to some players, is we just get up, we kill the Watcher, and then I'll pop out the old Exhausted Lantern Horde onto the board, and I'll say, And that's it. Congratulations, end of the campaign, very satisfying. But do you want to find out what happens next, or are you happy to leave it here? And if they want to go on, that's when I'll flip the card over and reveal on the back side of it, where I've kept them both in the same sleeve, the actual now updated Exhausted Lantern Horde. So I just wish Kingdom Death had a really good introductory campaign, because the prologue fight is amazingly well signaled. It's a fantastic introduction. It's really good. And this section here is just such a joy. It's such a fascinating, exciting period to play through. I really wish we just had a 5-year campaign that was this part of the campaign, ending with the butcher here, and just giving players, you've got 2 monsters, you've got your basic crafting locations, get to the butcher and beat it. You can, of course, though, curate that to play with other people, and I do recommend, if somebody's like, can we learn what Kingdom Death is like, sit them down with the goal of just playing this, and after beating the butcher, ask them if they want to go on further or not, because that's a really cool, good introduction, and it's a nice stop point for people to get a taster. This is a lot. 30 Lantern years is a lot. On the other things, most of it I don't have too many big issues with. I think the fact that this is dumped onto a survivor who has returns with the highest hunt XP is clunky. We can play around it, but if you're not aware it's coming, it kind of just sucks to have that get dumped onto you. I think the guidepost is a little bit too difficult to get, which is a shame, because it's actually a very cool and unique story beat, and it does have that nice extra bit of storytelling if you have it with the hand, but I don't like gaming the campaign to have that less than 7 supportive action. I think 7 population is actually quite low. It's quite hard once you're experienced to actually have a settlement in that situation. You kind of deliberately need to engineer it. Newer players may get there more often, maybe that's the intention. And as I said, I think in just general terms, Barbaric needs more of a buff, and when it comes to the quarry monsters you get with this, I think these are actually mostly great. White Lion is perfect. I have problems with White Lion armor, but the White Lion is baby's first Kingdom Death monster boss, and it is perfect at that. It is just such a well done, well baked, incredible part of the game. The Screaming Antelope, I really love how different it is. I think it just needs a little bit of tweaking and tuning. It's just got a few too many obvious weaknesses. The Phoenix, people know I'm not the biggest fan of the Phoenix. I prefer the Sunstalker and the Dragon King. However, updates to the Plumery have made this something I like a bit more. I just think I'll talk about that specifically in the Phoenix video. I think the Phoenix is just a little bit too finicky and complicated and annoying for your first Node 3 monster, but I don't think the Sunstalker or the Dragon King would be better either, so it kind of is what it is. Ultimately, I just find that the biggest thing is this game could have done with one more Node 1 or Node 2 monster, rather than it being in a extra box, an expansion box. But apart from that, having talked about this for a while and having those few nitpicks, minor misgivings and stuff, I think on the whole, as it stands, People of the Lantern is a very good campaign. Narratively, it's not my favourite. My favourite narrative campaign is People of the Stars, and then I think People of the Dreamkeeper is a really cool narrative, but People of the Lantern's not far behind those two at all. People of the Sun feels a bit empty, when it comes to mechanics, I love People of the Sun. When it comes to storytelling, it's really, really good up to a point, and then it kind of falls off when you reach the end part. I'll talk about that in a People of the Sun video. Overall, though, if nothing ever changed in People of the Lantern, I wouldn't be sad. It holds up really well considering its age. It's got some great beats and moments. It's very enticing, with the exception of the slight misstep when they added the gold smoke knife in. The whole mystery that's going on is really cool. I think the Watcher in particular is incredibly well done. Everything about the Watcher in this campaign is fantastic. This is the Watcher's campaign. That's how it was designed initially, and that's the monster that fits in best in the whole thing. And the fact that this is one of the best campaigns to just put whatever quarry monsters in you like, that's great. I do think when we're talking about the generic stuff that we could do with some alternative versions of these that come in the future and let us mix things up and change. It'd be really nice to maybe have like a bonesmith that has like a bone guitar and maybe, you know, a bone whip instead of this, and just have some alternatives. But that's not so much a case of issues with People of the Lantern. As I say, my main thing is it's long, it's very long, and I very much hope to see some maybe 5, 10, maybe even 15 Lantern Year campaigns come along in the future. So we got something more accessible to bring on newer players, because this is actually a lot to introduce a new player to unless they're a veteran board gamer. So yeah, there we are. 2.5 hours. It's gone 11 over here. So I'm going to have to wrap up. In fact, I think I probably yawned at least one point earlier during this video, but I really needed to try and get this one out before Black Friday. This will actually get released after Black Friday, but I'm just going to finish this off with, I really hope that the Frog Dog and the Black Knight and the Gambler's Chest and a bunch of the extra white boxes are all coming to the simulator, especially the 10-year anniversary survivors, the Ringtail Vixen, and Allison, and the White Speaker. I really hope they're all coming. I'm very excited to see what arrives, because I am so very happy with the KD simulator, and it keeps just getting better and better with every update, and this one's supposed to be quite a big one, so I'm very excited about that. But by the time this video comes out on the YouTube channel, you should already know what's happened, and we'll see. But fingers crossed. I'm really hoping to see the Gambler's Chest on here by the next time I log in. Actually, no, the next time I log in is going to be tomorrow for some more campaign play with Justin. No spoilers about what's going on there. If you've not seen that, I haven't really mentioned it on the channel before, but I am doing a playthrough of this exact campaign, base campaign, with Justin from Playing Board Games. He's having a whale of a time, and I'm just mostly letting him steer, while occasionally trying to keep the ship right when things go horribly wrong, and they certainly do go horribly wrong at times, and that's the delight of the game. So there we are, that's it. Thank you very much for listening. If you actually sat here for the whole thing in one entire go, then hopefully you feel less tired than I do, or hopefully you're not tired of my voice, we'll see. I would just like to wrap up with a big thank you to all of my patrons who make this possible, and actually, you know, I thank you to Adam for a really enjoyable and gripping and exciting game that has given us a whole new genre of board games in boss battlers. It's a real gift that's given to the board gaming world, and Kingdom Death continues to delight and excite and be really enjoyable and fun and uncompromising and everything. So big thank you to everyone who lets me carry on doing this. Final call to action, you know, give it a like if you stuck for the whole thing, and you're not subscribed. Subscribing helps. And if you like what I'm doing, you can support it by going to my Patreon, or you can chuck a little thank you via my Ko-fi, which is in the link below. They're always appreciated, because YouTube doesn't pay very well unless you get thousands and thousands of views per video, tens of thousands. So it's really great that people allow me to do this via their continued support on Patreon, and I greatly appreciate you all. That's fantastic, and I'm hoping to be able to do more coming ahead as and when my treatment finally finishes for my chronic decade-long illness, which it's getting better. So until next time, which will likely be a look at what happened as updated in the Black Friday update, and then after that will be a dark bestiary on the danger deer on the Screaming Antelope. So then, until then, thank you very much for listening, and I will see you next video. Bye.